Chapter 1685. After spending a few years, Luo Fan finally recovered from the extreme exhaustion of his body and life force. His entire body and mind had completely returned to their peak state. His body and mind had returned to their peak state. After completely recovering, he realized that he was at least 10 times stronger than he was back then. However, this kind of strength was all around. Although he clearly felt that he had become stronger, he could not tell exactly where he had become stronger and what had caused him to become stronger. It felt like a baby had suddenly grown into an adult. When a baby grew into an adult, it would naturally become many times stronger. However, with this kind of strengthening, could it be that he could still clearly tell which part was stronger? Could he still find the specific reason for the strengthening? In the end, he could only come to a conclusion that he had matured and grown. In the end, my realm is still not enough. Luo Fan sighed. After sighing, he began to observe this level, 9 world. This world was vast and boundless. Its rules, laws, and great Tao were all extremely vast and profound. Although he clearly knew that it contained the mysteries of all the worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it contained all the principles of the world. However, he could not find these specific things no matter how hard he tried. In a trance, it was as if he was in a perfect world. Although it's profound enough, it's still not suitable for my level of cultivation. Luo Fan sighed. Cultivation had to be done step by step. The higher the level and the more mysterious the cultivation environment was, the faster the cultivation speed would not be. That had to be combined with one's own situation in order to obtain the best cultivation effect. To the current Luo Fan, the highest level, 9 world within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, was obviously not suitable for his cultivation level. It could not unleash his cultivation speed to the limit. He sighed in his heart. Luo Fan retracted his gaze. In this world, there were also countless cultivators and a rather large number of false saints. Although the level of this world was high, these false saints did not obtain too many benefits from it. To them, the restrictions of their realm made them and the false saints of other worlds that were inferior to them. There was not much of a difference. If there was anything special about it, perhaps it was just that after they entered other worlds, the possibility of them becoming false sages would increase greatly. However, that was all. Apart from this, there were no other special benefits. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan's probing, Luo Fan's senses, and Luo Fan's aura. To the many false sages, he was an invisible existence. They might be able to vaguely sense that there seemed to be some kind of change in the world, but it was wishful thinking if they wanted to find it and lock on a Luo Fan. Even at this moment, Luo Fan turned around and left. He didn't notice anything at all. After Luo Fan left this world, his heart moved. He took a step forward and arrived outside of the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. He hovered in the middle of the ring and quietly looked at the 4 supreme emperors around the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. These 4 supreme emperors were all men. In fact, they were all young men, but the auras they exuded were all different. It just showed the difference between their cultivation paths. When these monarchs saw Luo Fan's appearance, their expressions all changed. Luo Fan's position was too ambiguous. These people could only watch from outside the ring of the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. They couldn't enter the center of the ring at all. However, this supreme emperor in front of them appeared there directly. It was as if that position had always been reserved for him. How could they not care about such a situation? How could they not think about it? Who are you? A supreme emperor asked. Luo Fan looked at this supreme emperor and said indifferently, I should be the one asking this. This natural, inextinguishable spirit light already belongs to me, but you guys actually came here to investigate without my permission. I'm afraid that's a little inappropriate. What a joke. This natural, inextinguishable spirit light belongs to the virtuous. You haven't refined it yet, so anyone can refine it. Since when did it become yours? Another supreme emperor who was more impatient said. Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. He pointed at the ring. In an instant, the ring trembled slightly. A strange wave suddenly leaked out, and swept in all directions. The four supreme sovereigns seemed to have been forcefully fixed in the void by an invisible hand. They were frozen, and even their spirits seemed to be unable to move, let alone their bodies. At this moment, all of them understood that even if this supreme emperor didn't completely refine the natural, inextinguishable spirit light, he must have refined a part of it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to control the natural, inextinguishable spirit light like this. After understanding this, their hearts were filled with regret. This person is already so powerful. Now that he has mastered the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, won't we become ants? A thought appeared in the minds of the four supreme sovereigns almost at the same time. Luo Fan didn't want to completely destroy these supreme emperors. After subduing them, he didn't do anything else. With a thought, the natural, inextinguishable spirit light shook again. Following that, the force that was restraining all of them naturally collapsed and turned into nothingness. The four supreme emperors felt their bodies lighten and their expressions turn cautious. They bowed at Luo Fan and said, "Since this natural, inextinguishable spirit light already belongs to you, we won't disturb you any further. Farewell." Luo Fan faintly smiled and said, "I won't see you out." He didn't have any thoughts of continuing to pester them, even though he had a reason to do so. After all, while these supreme emperors were powerful, and if they were placed in the outside world, every single one of them could become the absolute ruler of a large area. However, to the current Luo Fan, they were nothing. If he wanted it, what they could offer, everything that he could do it with just a thought, and he could do it with just a thought. The supreme emperors were overjoyed to see that Luo Fan allowed them to leave. They bowed and thanked Luo Fan. They turned into rays of light and shot away, disappearing right in front of Luo Fan. After sending them away, Luo Fan turned around and looked at the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, at the 8 supreme martial emperors who had formed a formation. Compared to the 4 people outside, Luo Fan wouldn't let the 8 supreme emperors inside the natural, inextinguishable spirit light off so easily. The 4 people outside were merely observing and comprehending the mysteries of the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. It was equivalent to a man looking at a beautiful woman with an appreciative gaze. Or perhaps, to fantasize about it, the beautiful woman might feel a little uncomfortable, but normally she wouldn't do anything drastic to teach him a lesson. However, it was different for the 8 supreme emperors inside the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. If they were to use the analogy of seeing a beautiful woman, these 8 supreme emperors would be like a man who saw a beautiful woman. Not only would he be tempted, but he would also take action and go to the home of the beautiful woman, with the intention of violence. To Luo Fan obviously, he wouldn't let them off so easily. With a thought, Luo Fan lifted his hand and pointed. In an instant, the 8 supreme emperors felt their bodies being restrained by an indescribable force. Immediately after, that force trembled slightly and pulled. Their wills had already been pulled out of their bodies and charged toward a certain place in the void. In the blink of an eye, they broke through layers of space-time and the obstruction of the void, arriving outside the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. They appeared in front of a figure surrounded by a halo. The 8 supreme emperors were shocked and afraid. They looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. "Everyone, are you happy in my natural, inextinguishable spirit light?" Luo Fan looked at them and asked calmly. Upon hearing this, the 8 supreme rulers' faces changed again. His natural, inextinguishable spirit light. This was the first thought that appeared in their minds. Following that, they said, "Happy. This kind of torment is like being in hell. How can you be happy?" "What do you mean, my friend? Isn't this natural, inextinguishable spirit light ownerless?" In the end, one of the Supreme Emperor's consciousnesses asked, "Ownerless? Everyone, please take a closer look," Luo Fan said calmly. The 8 Supreme Emperor's consciousnesses weren't completely unaware. After all, Luo Fan's current position was really ambiguous. Moreover, The method he used to grab their consciousnesses from their bodies was really mysterious. Now that they heard what Luo Fan said, they finally dispelled their hopes of getting lucky. We didn't know that you had already refined the natural, inextinguishable spirit light and thought that it was ownerless. Therefore, we offended you. Please forgive us, the Supreme Emperor said straightforwardly. Although you all made such a mistake because you didn't know, a mistake is a mistake. It doesn't mean that a mistake isn't a mistake just because you didn't know, Luo Fan said calmly. These words caused the Supreme Emperor's expressions to turn extremely unsightly. As Supreme Emperors, they naturally had pride in their hearts. This kind of pride made it hard for any of them to yield easily. To them, they had already admitted their mistakes and admitted that they had made a mistake by entering the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. They had offended the other party, but the other party was still unyielding. He was treating them like fish on a chopping board. How could they accept this? Fellow Taoist, you've gone too far. One of the Supreme Emperors frowned. Fellow Taoist, you placed the natural, inextinguishable spirit light right here without any defensive measures. You didn't even mark that the natural, inextinguishable spirit light belonged to you. It wasn't a mistake for us to enter and try to refine it. Now that we've admitted our mistakes, fellow Taoist, you're still unforgiving. I'm afraid you've lost your composure. Lost my composure. I didn't expect you to still be so arrogant after making a mistake. Luo Fan looked at them and said expressionlessly. As he spoke, he slowly raised his hand and aimed it at the 8 of them. He was about to use force to erase their consciousnesses. At this moment, waves of consciousnesses suddenly pierced through the air and descended from the outside world. They poured into the consciousnesses of the 8 Supreme Emperors in front of Luo Fan. As the waves of consciousnesses pierced through the air, the consciousnesses of the 8 Supreme Emperors began to quickly solidify. Before long, the consciousnesses had already transformed from a state of nothingness into a body of flesh and blood. They had formed a clone. The waves of consciousnesses that pierced through the air were none other than the original bodies of the 8 Supreme Emperors. They were the original bodies of the 8 Supreme Emperors. After sensing what had happened to their clones, they transmitted their power and consciousnesses over, directly rebuilding their clones here, so that they would no longer have to face Luo Fan with their weak consciousnesses. Luo Fan looked at their performance and only smiled faintly. His palm slapped toward them without hesitation. He didn't use any spirit light or divine abilities with this slap. He only gathered the power of the natural, inextinguishable spirit light on his palm. As his palm moved, it was sent toward the bodies of the 8 Supreme Emperors that had just formed. There was no need to doubt the strength of the power that was sent over like this. In the void, it had already stirred up the murky existence in the surroundings, causing the dense and solid aura of primal chaos to naturally gather toward that power. The aura of primal chaos itself already contained endless profundities and principles. Now that it was gathered like this, it directly caused that wave of power to undergo earth-shattering changes. Endless rules were derived, and countless 4 basic existences were formed. They merged together, twisting and transforming as they forcefully crushed toward the clones of the 8 Supreme Emperors. At this moment, the 8 Supreme Emperors felt an indescribable sense of crisis. None of them dared to be careless. Waves of spirit light that were like rivers rushed out of their bodies, forming a mysterious formation in the void. As it operated and twisted, a shocking might erupted, blocking the power that Luo Fan had blasted out. Chi, with a soft and crisp sound, the power that Luo Fan had slapped out changed and crushed the formation formed by the countless spirit lights. Taking a step further, it continued to crush towards the 8 Supreme Emperors, slowly crushing their bodies and directly crushing their clones into smithereens. Boom, boom, boom. With 8 earth-shattering explosions, the clones of the 8 Supreme Emperors were completely crushed into powder and turned into nothingness. This scene, this momentum, was even more majestic than when the 2 parties' attacks had collided. It was even more terrifying. How is this possible? At this moment, the 8 supreme emperors within the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light trembled slightly. The clones within the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light trembled slightly and regained their senses. Although their wills had been completely crushed by Luo Fan's power and turned into powder before disappearing without a trace. However, this didn't mean that their clones had completely turned into walking corpses. In fact, although Luo Fan had previously extracted their wills, he hadn't gone to the extreme. Instead, he had left a trace of their wills in the clones to control their bodies. Perhaps he hadn't left any leeway, but it would have taken 100 or even 1,000 times more power to completely extract their wills. He didn't want to waste it, so he had left a trace of their wills behind. To the Supreme Emperors, any shred of their will was actually a boundless existence that contained boundless power. If they wanted to grow, it would be extremely easy for them. Therefore, at this moment, when Luo Fan had completely crushed their wills and turned them into powder before disappearing without a trace, inside the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light, their clones had recovered and could still react like living creatures. How could he be so powerful? Another Supreme Emperor's eyes were filled with fear as he said, "He is the owner of the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. It's not surprising that he can use the power of the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light to be a little more powerful." Another more rational Supreme Emperor said at this moment, "Then, what should we do now?" Another Supreme Emperor asked with a solemn expression. The 8 of them were already on good terms with each other. Now that they were in the same predicament and facing the same powerful enemy, they were even more united than before. "Let us destroy this clone." That comparatively calmer Supreme Emperor spoke. He destroyed his doppelganger? The other Supreme Emperors frowned. A doppelganger was equivalent to another him. Every time he destroyed his clone, it was equivalent to committing suicide. And this kind of thing to anyone. None of this was a pleasant thing. Therefore, anyone with a doppelganger would not give up their doppelganger unless it was absolutely necessary. That's right. We can only destroy the current clone. Only then can the main body be removed. The Supreme Emperor said. Hearing this, the other Supreme Sovereigns fell into deep thought. All right, I don't want this clone anymore. The thoughts of the Supreme Emperor were unparalleled. In just a short moment, he had already considered the pros and cons and made a decision in an instant. With this decision in mind, they looked at each other, and the spirit light inside their bodies erupted like crazy. It began to wreak havoc in their bodies. Destroy everything that the divine light touched. Destroy everything that its power could affect. As Supreme Sovereigns, even if it was just a clone, their spirit force and power were powerful enough to destroy an infinite world. This kind of spirit light, this kind of power, frantically exploded within their bodies, frantically destroying everything in their bodies that could be destroyed. The result of this was self-evident. Almost in the blink of an eye, the bodies of the 8 of them were completely annihilated by the spirit force and power. Their entire bodies started to dissipate as if they were made of smoke, gradually merging into the void around them, striding in a direction that did not exist. At this moment, Luo Fan was watching their every move with cold eyes, as his body of flesh and blood had already resonated with the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. He could understand everything that was happening inside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. He only needed to know. He would know instantly. When the 8 Supreme Sovereigns were discussing how to solve their current predicament in that world and how to prevent Luo Fan from dealing with them, he had already sensed it and focused his senses on them. Therefore, at this moment, he had full control over all the decisions they made, all the spirit force in their bodies, and all the destruction caused by their power. In fact, if he wanted to stop them now and let them come back to life, it would only be a matter of a thought. However, Luo Fan, who had been watching all this, did not do anything at this moment. He just quietly watched as the bodies of the 8 of them were gradually annihilated. He watched as their life force was gradually revealed and gradually collapsed under the impact of the countless spirit lights and power. At this moment, a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Did they really think that they could escape so easily? If that was the case, How could the broken emperor be imprisoned in this innate, inextinguishable spirit light? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the development of the situation confirmed his thoughts. Within the life origin, a ray of white light began to emerge from nothing. Within this white light, there was a kind of eternal and inextinguishable charm that could not be worn down by 10,000 tribulations. This was obviously the innate, indestructible essence that existed in the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. After this innate, indestructible essence was revealed, it began to expand crazily. In the beginning, it only occupied a small space between their life force origin. In the blink of an eye, it had already covered their entire life force origin. It gradually assimilated their life force origin into the innate, indestructible essence. Under such a change, the 8 people's life force origin seemed to have undergone a qualitative upgrade, faintly giving off an innate, indestructible feeling. It was as if they had been assimilated by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light and had become a part of it. In fact, this wasn't a misconception. At this moment, their life force origin had really become a part of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. At the moment when their life force origin was about to be destroyed, the innate, indestructible essence that had integrated into their life force origin suddenly erupted and did its utmost to prevent their life force origin from collapsing. During this process, the innate, indestructible essence naturally fused with the origin of their lives, completely occupying the origin of all their lives after they were reborn. Chapter 1686. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Extraordinary Primitive Times and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Follow the official account, WeChat, add friends, add the official account, type DD, and tell me secretly. The life force of the 8 supreme sovereigns began to grow and change rapidly during the process. In the blink of an eye, 8 bodies appeared outside the life force, completely covering it up. These 8 bodies were the original bodies of the 8 supreme sovereigns. Hold on a little longer. They hovered quietly in the world. Their faces were no longer as resolute as before. Instead, there was only peace and joy. It was as if they had suddenly seen through everything and understood everything. There was no longer any doubt or resentment in their hearts. I can't believe we were so repulsed by this state before. It's really incomprehensible. One of the supreme sovereigns sighed. Exactly. This state is so wonderful. Moreover, it allows us to be eternal and indestructible. It's a state that we've been dreaming of. Before this, we would rather die than enter this state. We really don't know what's good for us. Fortunately, this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light is so mysterious. It didn't give up on us at the last moment before we died. Another supreme sovereign said. The other supreme sovereigns were also filled with fear and relief at this moment. This scene would have sent chills down anyone's spine. Even Luo Fan's expression became somewhat inexplicable after hearing their conversation. Domineering indeed, he sighed to himself. With a thought, his figure appeared before the 8 supreme sovereigns. Thank you, fellow cultivator. The supreme sovereigns looked solemn when they saw Luo Fan and bowed to Luo Fan. They said, hearing this, Luo Fan only nodded calmly and said, I won't hide it from you, fellow cultivators. I'll let you be refined by this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. My goal is to plot against your true bodies. Hearing his words, the supreme emperors did not show any signs of confusion or shock. It was only a matter of course. Although they were clones of the main body before this, and only possessed the will and thoughts of the main body, their mentality had completely changed after just a few breaths of time. For them now, the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was their main body. The benefits of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light were their benefits. For the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, not to mention their original bodies, even the entire perfect world and the supreme true sage were insignificant and could be sacrificed. With such a mentality, as long as Luo Fan gave them any reason, they could easily sell their bodies, turning their bodies into Luo Fan's power. Not to mention Luo Fan's suggestion. Even if Luo Fan hadn't mentioned it, they might have deduced it themselves and felt that it would be beneficial to the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and to Luo Fan. They might even take the initiative to plot against their true bodies. Their true bodies fell directly into Luo Fan's hands. Under such circumstances, it was natural for them to do so at this time. It was only natural for them to do so. Luo Fan looked at them expressionlessly, but in his heart, he was deeply moved by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Since that's the case, fellow Taoists, you can now begin to communicate with your main bodies and work hard to exert influence on them, Luo Fan said after a pause. Using the connection between the clones and the main body to influence the main body and change the main body's mentality was not difficult for any clones. Even though the clones had been refined by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the connection still existed. This kind of influence could naturally happen, of course. This kind of influence was not always successful. If the main body was vigilant, had doubts in his heart, and was constantly on guard, this effect naturally wouldn't be too obvious. But even if it wasn't too obvious, the effect couldn't be completely eliminated. The 8 supreme sovereigns all smiled and nodded. Then, the 8 of them closed their eyes and started to move. Their minds started to trace the connection between the main body and the clones and slowly communicate with their main body. For a moment, angry roars sounded from this connection. This kind of roar was invisible and spiritual. Ordinary people would not be able to hear it no matter how close they were to them. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan was not just an ordinary person. He could almost be considered the most extraordinary person in the world. However, he could clearly hear such a formless voice. These voices were naturally the voices of the true bodies of these supreme sovereigns. After feeling the offense of the doppelganger, and after being schemed against by the doppelganger, they were naturally enraged. This kind of reaction is considered normal. Hearing this, it was not that Luo Fan was not worried. Instead, he felt inexplicably relaxed. This kind of anger and pain from being offended seemed like the normal behavior of normal living beings. In comparison, the behavior of the supreme emperors before him was rather strange. At this moment, the endless worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light started to glow with white light. This was the connate, inextinguishable essence contained within each world. After the connate, inextinguishable essence was formed, it started to rapidly gather towards this world from all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had already crossed the layers of barriers and poured into the bodies of the 8 people before him, turning them into 8 figures of light. Following this change, the 8 of them seemed to have suddenly become eternal and indestructible true saints. Each and every one of them seemed to have become countless times stronger and taller than before. Then, all the white light began to slowly enter their bodies, and through some indescribable mysterious channel, it was transmitted across the sky. At this moment, the invisible roar from before sounded again. This time, the roar was even louder and more furious than before. In fact, there was even an inexplicable sense of panic in the roar, allowing those who heard it to clearly understand how terrible the mood of the existence that was making this roar was. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing rang out from the mysterious channel. Then, the white light rushed back and enveloped the 8 clones of the Supreme Emperors in front of Luo Fan in the innate, indestructible white light again. They looked exactly the same as before, exactly the same as before, exactly the same as before, exactly the same as before. This appearance, clearly, their true bodies had used some sort of method to forcefully intercept the connate, inextinguishable essence. Not only did it prevent the connate, inextinguishable essence from fusing with their life force, but it also blocked the connate, inextinguishable essence back. At this moment, there was only an indescribable expression on Luo Fan's face. He looked at the 8 supreme emperors before him and shook his head with a sigh. Then, he turned around and left this world. The fundamental reason why Luo Fan could command these supreme emperors who had been refined by the connate inextinguishable spirit light was because his flesh and blood had already formed a deep resonance with the connate inextinguishable spirit light. This resonance caused him to, in fact, become one with the connate inextinguishable spirit light. Therefore, to these supreme emperors who had already been refined by the connate inextinguishable spirit light, Luo Fan was equivalent to a part of the connate inextinguishable spirit light. His orders were naturally the orders of the connate inextinguishable spirit light. With their mentality from the perspective of the connate inextinguishable spirit light, how could they possibly doubt Luo Fan's orders? This could actually be seen from Tong Huang, who had been refined by the connate inextinguishable spirit light. Tong Huang back then, compared to the 8 supreme emperors before him, the degree of refinement by the connate inextinguishable spirit light was deeper, and their mentality was closer to the connate inextinguishable spirit light. Under such circumstances, when facing Luo Fan back then, he didn't even have any desire to resist. In the end, he could only stand there and wait for Luo Fan to strip the connate inextinguishable essence from his life force. Even Tong Huang was in such a state. Naturally, these supreme emperors performed even worse. After Luo Fan left, these supreme emperors didn't slack off. Through the mysterious connection between the doppelganger and the original body, they continuously transmitted the connate inextinguishable essence to the original body. They continuously attacked the original body's life force, trying to integrate into it. However, for them, it was a pity that the distance between the main body and the clone was just too far, and there were just too many obstacles in between. As a result, the power of the innate indestructible essence was greatly reduced when it reached the main body. Their bodies, on the other hand, were able to block the innate indestructible essence with simple means, preventing the innate indestructible essence from threatening their life source. However, even though they had intercepted the connate inextinguishable essence, this process was extremely damaging to the bodies of these supreme emperors. It wasn't the slightest bit discounted. They had been tricked by their own doppelganger, and their doppelganger had continuously transmitted something fatal to them through this mysterious connection, trying to drag them down and make them fall into the same situation as their doppelganger. This situation, for these extremely arrogant supreme emperors, was simply a slap to their faces. Every time they blocked it, it was like reminding them of their own weakness. Every time they eliminated a threat, it was like reminding them of the humiliation they were suffering. How could such a process make these supreme emperors look good? Not all of these supreme emperors were comprehending the state of chaos. However, some of them were controlling large areas between heaven and earth, becoming the supreme emperors of those areas. At this time, when they were in such a terrible mood, the power of these supreme emperors who controlled large areas began to fluctuate. Unknowingly, it changed the environment of the areas they controlled, causing the winds and clouds to surge. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. During this process, it was unknown how many mountains, plains, rivers, and oceans underwent earth-shattering changes. All sorts of indescribable natural sceneries were formed. What should we do? This thought appeared in the hearts of these emperors almost at the same time. Of course, it wasn't because the innate indestructible essence transmitted by those doppelganger was already unstoppable and unthinkable. It was because, at this moment, those doppelgangers simply did not relax, nor did it stop. No matter how many times they blocked that innate indestructible essence, they would send their attacks over in the next instant. They had no choice but to continue blocking. They had no choice but to continue blocking. This process, for a short period of time, would not affect them much. But if they did not stop, how could they cultivate? How could they comprehend the Tao? How could they pursue the Sage Realm? They were very clear that although those doppelganger had been refined by the innate indestructible spirit light, they were still their doppelganger. But, after all, they were still their doppelganger. Even if the personality of those doppelganger had changed, that tenacious nature, but it would not fade in the slightest. In other words, their doppelganger would not stop in a short period of time. It would not give them freedom to cultivate and comprehend the Tao in a short period of time. This was what made them feel helpless, and it was also what they wanted to find a solution to. I don't know what's going on there now. Maybe sending another doppelganger to check out the situation isn't a bad choice. This thought appeared in the mind of one of the supreme emperors. Although those doppelganger that had been refined by the innate indestructible spirit light were still their doppelganger, after they were refined, they could no longer sense what was happening to those doppelganger. Therefore, they could only sense what had happened before the doppelganger was completely refined. After that, everything that had happened after the doppelganger was completely refined. Everything that had happened was completely baffling to them. As soon as the idea of sending a doppelganger to observe appeared, it was like maggots in a tarsal bone, difficult to get rid of, especially when that doppelganger was still continuously transmitting innate indestructible essence. It was even more so when it wanted to rush into the origin of their lives soon. That Supreme Emperor had already made a decision. With a thought, a doppelganger appeared from his body and directly broke out of the cave abode where he was cultivating. It was an extremely fantastical world that seemed to be constructed from countless colors in an extremely complicated way. Although he had already decided to send the doppelganger to check out the location of the innate indestructible spirit light, this doppelganger did not go there directly. Before going through this Supreme Emperor was already very clear that even if his doppelganger had received more power from him, compared to the enemy at the location of the innate indestructible spirit light, it was still extremely insignificant. If he just went there casually, before he could find the answer to his question, before he could deal with the problem of the doppelganger that had been refined, his doppelganger would probably be destroyed. Therefore, this Supreme Emperor directly went to the place where some of his best friends were, planning to invite them to go with him and work together to deal with Luo Fan. This Supreme Sovereign was known as the Light Sovereign. His best friend was none other than Tong Huang. Light Emperor's doppelganger flew quickly. Time and space seemed illusory as he flew, and he could cross countless layers in the blink of an eye. Not long after, Light Emperor's doppelganger had already passed through the barriers of time and space and entered a dusky place. This was a cave abode. This place was only a fine line away from the state of chaos. Although he could not touch it, he could clearly sense where the state of chaos was. Fellow Taoist Tong Huang, save me, Light Emperor shouted after entering the cave abode. At this moment, an incomparably gentle force swept over Light Emperor's body. With a slight guidance, Light Emperor was already brought into the depths of the cave abode. He directly appeared next to a child who was sitting cross-legged and facing the state of chaos. Light Emperor looked at the state of chaos in front of the child. Even though the situation was extremely urgent, even though he was waiting for Tong Huang to save him, at this moment, he could not help but praise in his heart. Fellow Taoist Tong Huang is indeed unfathomable to actually be able to directly comprehend the state of chaos. Only an existence like him would be able to praise like this. Putting aside the fact that Luo Fan could directly comprehend the state of chaos and remove all barriers between him and the state of chaos, he could directly observe the state of chaos with his own eyes without any barriers. This was not something that Tong Huang, who was still separated by a layer of barriers, could compare to. Just the method that Zhu Huang and the others used to comprehend the state of chaos was not something that Tong Huang could compare to. Fellow Taoist, why are you so worried? Tong Huang broke away from the process of comprehending the state of chaos and sighed in his heart that his progress was too slow. He turned and asked Light Emperor. When Light Emperor heard this, he collected his thoughts and said, "I'm here to beg fellow Taoist to save me." Tong Huang was shocked when he heard this. Although Light Emperor was a good friend that he had only befriended in the past tens of millions of years, compared to other friends that had existed for trillions of years, the time they had known each other was considered short. However, because their paths of cultivation overlapped, and they were quite satisfied with each other's personalities, their friendship could be considered to be quite deep. Now that Light Emperor had made it sound so serious, Tong Huang hurriedly asked, "Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. Please speak slowly. If I can help, I won't refuse. A few million years ago, I accidentally came across an innate, inextinguishable spirit light at the gate of chaos. Emperor Ming explained how he found the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, how he met the others, and how he made an appointment. How he fell into the trap, how he was almost refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, and so on and so forth. He talked about how he was continuously attacked by the clone's innate, inextinguishable essence. Throughout the entire process, he did not hide anything, nor did he leave out any important details. He told Tong Huang everything without holding anything back. At first, Tong Huang was confused about what had happened, but the more he listened, the more he understood. His expression became even weirder. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's how it is. At this time, I have no other choice but to beg you to save my life. Finally, Light's sovereign concluded his story with these words. When Tong Huang heard him finish speaking, he asked in a strange tone, "Fellow Taoist, do you know why I opened up a cave abode here 30 million years ago?" Emperor Ming was puzzled. In the past, Tong Huang was clearly a straightforward person. Even if it was the right time, he wouldn't say anything unnecessary. Why was the matter so urgent now? Why did he say something so inappropriate? However, since they were friends, he could only force himself to continue asking, "I don't know about that. However, it's fortunate that you opened up a cave abode here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get to know you." Tong Huang sighed and said, "Back then, I suffered a loss at the gate of chaos and realized how weak I was. That's why I chose to open up a cave abode here and comprehend the state of chaos." The gate of chaos that they were talking about was the grayish existence that Luo Fan was currently in. The reason why they called it the gate of chaos was because the gap between that location and the state of chaos had been broken. However, it was the most convenient passage to the state of chaos. When Emperor Ming heard Tong Huang's words, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "Fellow Taoist, are you saying that's right? Back then, I suffered a great loss at the same innate, inextinguishable spiritual light." Tong Huang sighed. Such a coincidence. Emperor Ming's bad premonition was confirmed, and he couldn't help but be shocked. Tong Huang didn't waste any more time. He sighed and told Emperor Ming everything that happened, no matter how embarrassing it was compared to Emperor Ming's millions of years of experience. Tong Huang's experience at the place where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was only tens of thousands of years. It wasn't even 1% of Emperor Ming's time, but his experience was many times richer than Emperor Ming's. The ups and downs, the pain and suffering, and the narrow escape from death made Emperor Ming's expression change, and he couldn't control himself. "So that's how it is. If I knew this, I would have asked for your advice before going." Emperor Ming sighed, and his face was full of regret. The innate, inextinguishable spiritual light represented eternal indestructibility and indestructibility. Unless there was no other way, no one would be able to make up their mind to share it with others. Even if the person who shared it was a good friend, this situation wouldn't change. Therefore, even though Emperor Ming found the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light by chance, he didn't know about it. However, after thinking about it for a while, he still didn't reveal the information about the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to Tong Huang. Instead, he went to the gate of chaos and tried to take the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light for himself. Now, Emperor Ming was extremely regretful. He regretted his selfishness. Chapter 1687. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Extraordinary Chaotic World and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Follow Chidian's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. Tong Huang smiled faintly. Naturally, he could see Emperor Ming's selfishness clearly at this moment. However, even though he could see it clearly, he didn't pay much attention to it. At the level of supreme emperors like them, putting themselves in someone else's shoes was already the most basic ability. He could understand Emperor Ming's choice. He knew that if he were in Emperor Ming's shoes, he would have done the same. Therefore, he could only say, This is also fate's way of making fools of people. What should we do? Emperor Ming asked blankly. Now we have to see what that fellow Taoist is thinking. The only way is to surrender to that fellow Taoist and pay a sufficient price for that fellow Taoist to let you go, Tong Huang said. This was the only way he knew of. Otherwise, there was no need for Luo Fan to make a move. As long as Luo Fan didn't care about it, the doppelgangers within the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that had already been refined would naturally cause enough trouble for them. Not only that, it might even lead to unimaginable consequences. Surrender. Emperor Ming was stunned. How could he not know that this was the only way? It was just that before Tong Huang spoke, he really didn't want to believe it or admit it. Now, Tong Huang had destroyed his last hope. He naturally couldn't lie to himself anymore. Thank you for your guidance, fellow Taoist. In the end, Emperor Ming sighed and bowed. You're too kind. You're too courteous, fellow Taoist. I'm truly ashamed that I couldn't help you, Tong Huang said sheepishly. Hearing this, Emperor Ming sighed and bowed again. Then, he bid farewell and left. After leaving Tong Huang's cave, Emperor Ming's body swayed. The doppelganger sped towards the Chaos Gate. Soon, he arrived at the Primal Chaos Gate. Then, he went to where Luo Fan was, to where the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was. Upon arriving, Emperor Ming's face changed, because he found that the other 7 clones of the Supreme Sovereigns had arrived as well. However, the other 7 clones were not there to surrender. Instead, they each radiated with powerful auras as they prepared to unleash all sorts of earth-shattering attacks. Obviously, they wanted to use their strength to force Luo Fan to release their clones. When the Supreme Sovereigns saw Emperor Ming, their eyes were filled with joy. Fellow Taoist, why are you so slow? We've been waiting here for a long time. One of the Supreme Sovereign's clones said. Unlike Emperor Ming, they didn't have anyone to ask around. Instead, they just created a clone and sent it here. He had come to confront Luo Fan, to force Luo Fan. Emperor Ming, they were one step ahead of him. Seeing their expressions and hearing their words, he felt a chill run down his spine. Monarch Ming's expression changed drastically, and he said, Fellow Taoists, please wait. That expert's strength is countless times stronger than ours. Even if we were to come with our true bodies, we would definitely not be able to defeat him. If we were to fight, we would definitely lose. As he spoke, he hurried to the front of the 7 sovereigns. When the 7 sovereigns heard Emperor Ming's words, they all frowned. Although they weren't ordinary people, every one of them was an intelligent person. How was it possible for them to believe that the combined strength of the 8 of them couldn't even compare to one of the sovereigns? At this moment, every single one of the Supreme Emperors felt a strong sense of dissatisfaction towards the Light Emperor. One of the sovereigns said, Even if you don't want to help, we understand your fear and won't blame you. Why are you trying to dampen our morale? I'm not trying to dampen your morale. I've already asked a good friend. This Luo's sovereign strength is enough to shake the heavens and the earth. Not to mention the 8 of us. Even 80 of us combined wouldn't be able to defeat him. If we make a move, we'll be seeking our own deaths. Emperor Ming sighed. These words finally made the expressions of the Supreme Emperors change slightly. Listening to a good friend. I wonder who your friend is? How does he know how strong Luo's sovereign is? One of the sovereigns asked. Hearing this, Emperor Ming sighed. That's all I have to say. If you believe me, then believe me. If you don't, then don't. It's all up to you. This was Emperor Ming's true thoughts. The reason why he had stopped the 7 Supreme Emperors was because they were friends. He could not bear to watch them crash into the iron wall and be badly battered. It would be a tragic sight to see. Now that he had said it, and they didn't believe him, he had done his best. If they wanted to do it, then it was their own business. After sighing, he stepped aside and let the 7 sovereigns move on their own. At this moment, the 7 Supreme Martial Emperors looked hesitant instead. This was human nature. When someone tried to stop you from doing something, you would unknowingly object for the sake of objecting. You would persist for the sake of persevering. You wouldn't have the time to calmly think about whether the other party was right or wrong. However, when the other party stopped trying and gave up, you would start to hesitate and doubt. You would start to think about whether what the other party said was possible and whether there would be any danger if you persisted. This kind of human nature was not an exception, even if one had reached the level of a supreme emperor. At this moment, the 7 supreme sovereigns began to ponder over the contents of the Light Emperor's words. However, they were sovereigns after all. Their determination wasn't something ordinary people could compare to. After some thought, they didn't change their minds. They all harumphed coldly at Emperor Ming. They no longer restricted their own strength. Countless spiritual lights and energy surged out of their bodies. It condensed into a strange palm in the void, directly breaking through the air and grabbing towards the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that Luo Fan was in. This palm was huge, and its power was earth-shattering. Just the process of it reaching out had already stirred up the dusky existence in the surroundings, causing countless worlds to be created. Countless space-time, as well as countless concepts of destruction, rushed towards the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It wanted to drill into the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and drill towards Luo Fan. At this time, Luo Fan had just arrived outside a certain world and was about to enter it. Just at this moment, he frowned and looked out of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As he looked out, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. In the blink of an eye, he had already understood the thoughts of the 8 supreme emperors and grasped their respective attitudes. Overestimating yourselves. After seeing everything clearly, he only sneered. After laughing, he gently raised his hand, and a simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light rushed out of his hand, condensing into a simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light in the void. It condensed into a palm and suddenly grabbed at the palm outside of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. At this moment, the palm directly penetrated the void. It directly penetrated through space-time and grabbed the palm formed from the 7 sovereigns' spiritual light and power. The moment the two collided, the palm formed from the 7 sovereigns was silently shattered into countless tiny fragments like exploding fireworks. It directly scattered into the dusky existence in the surroundings and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. It was as if it had never appeared in the first place. At this moment, the palm formed from Luo Fan's spiritual light didn't stop at all. Without the slightest delay, it directly grabbed at the 7 sovereigns. In the blink of an eye, the palm formed from the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light pressed down on the 7 sovereigns. With a slight tremble, the 7 sovereigns directly collapsed and turned into dust. Just like the fireworks from before, they also collapsed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. At this moment, almost at the same time, the life force of the 7 sovereigns also collapsed and disappeared. With the collapse of the life force, the 7 sovereigns' clones naturally disappeared without a trace. After doing all this, Luo Fan casually withdrew his hand. The palm formed from the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light shrank slightly and returned to the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, back into his hand and back into his body. After that, he turned his gaze to the last remaining supreme emperor, Emperor Ming. "Why didn't you make a move just now?" Luo Fan asked faintly. "I'm a good friend of Tong Huang." Ming Huang sighed. If he was a little hesitant about Tong Huang's evaluation of Luo Fan before, after witnessing how Luo Fan easily annihilated the other 7 sovereigns and completely destroyed their life force, he already understood that not only did Tong Huang's evaluation of Luo Fan not improve, but it actually decreased. Luo Fan was even more terrifying than what Tong Huang had imagined. Under such circumstances, how would he dare to have any thoughts of resistance? Supreme sovereigns weren't afraid of challenges, but there had to be benefits and a chance of victory. If there were no benefits and no chance of victory, then only a fool would accept such a challenge. And Ming Huang was obviously not a fool. On the contrary, he was a supreme sovereign who couldn't be any smarter. Why would he do such a stupid thing? "Oh, so you know Tong Huang." No wonder. Luo Fan suddenly understood. If Ming Huang knew Tong Huang, he would naturally know his methods. It was normal for him to surrender so easily. This time, I've come to surrender. I wonder what fellow Taoist wants me to do. As long as it is within my capabilities, please tell me, Ming Huang said without hesitation. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "You are very tactful. I don't have to tell you what I want you to do for now. Go back first. When I need you to do something in the future, I will naturally contact you." Towards Luo Fan's decision, Ming Huang naturally wasn't satisfied. However, the situation was stronger than the person. Even if he was not satisfied, so what if he wasn't satisfied? He could only bow carefully and said, "If that's the case, I will take my leave. If you need anything in the future, please tell me. I will not hesitate." Luo Fan only nodded lightly. As he spoke, he let the innate, inextinguishable spirit light enter. The clone that had been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light stopped attacking Ming Huang's main body. As it stopped attacking, Ming Huang's main body suddenly felt his body and mind relax. A feeling of relaxation that he hadn't felt in a long time made him let out a long sigh. Fellow Taoist Tong Huang's words are indeed priceless. It's a pity that such a huge weakness is in someone else's hands. From now on, unless my cultivation reaches the true sage level, I will never be able to get rid of this weakness. Such a thought flashed through his mind. Letting out a long sigh, he controlled his clone to quickly leave the gate of primal chaos and head towards where his main body was at. One must know that although this was just a clone, it still contained a huge amount of his power. It also contained a part of his consciousness. Naturally, he couldn't give it up after sending Ming Huang away. Luo Fan turned his gaze to the remaining 7 Supreme Sovereigns. Of course, at this moment, the 7 clones of the Supreme Sovereigns had already been erased. The Supreme Sovereigns that he was looking at now. Naturally, they were inside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. The 7 Supreme Sovereigns that had already been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Just as he was looking at the 7 clones of the Supreme Sovereigns, deep in thought, he felt that there was an inexplicable movement outside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. In the blink of an eye, they had already arrived outside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Luo Fan's heart stirred. He raised his eyes and swept his gaze over, revealing a faint smile on his face. There were 7 figures. "You guys came pretty fast," Luo Fan said calmly. As he spoke, his figure swayed, and he had already arrived outside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. He appeared at the center of the ring, quietly looking at the 7 Supreme Sovereigns that had appeared not far away from him. The 7 Supreme Sovereigns all had a flash of hesitation in their eyes. Immediately after, everyone's expression became helpless. Luo Fan knew what they were thinking just by looking at their expressions. Just now, when they saw Luo Fan appear outside the innate, inextinguishable spirit light alone, their first thought was to take advantage of this good opportunity to get rid of Luo Fan. They might even want to go one step further and get rid of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light around Luo Fan. The reason why the light disappeared in a flash was also very simple. It must be because they recalled what Luo Fan had done before. They knew that it had already broken away from the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, but his strength was still countless times stronger than theirs. If they attacked him, the final result would definitely be that the 7 of them would be destroyed in an instant. It was because of these various thoughts that they were behaving in such a manner at this moment. We are convinced. Those supreme monarchs glanced at each other and bowed to Luo Fan as they spoke. Does that mean we surrender? Luo Fan didn't give them any face and asked directly. Hearing this, the Supreme Sovereign's expressions changed slightly, but they didn't turn hostile in the end. They sighed and nodded. One of the Supreme Sovereigns said, "That's right, we surrender. If you have any orders, just let us know. Wouldn't it have saved us a lot of trouble if we had done this earlier?" Luo Fan only said faintly. The 7 Supreme Emperors all had helpless looks on their faces. If they had done this earlier, it would have saved them a lot of trouble. But if they had done this earlier, then they wouldn't be supreme sovereigns anymore. They might not even have been able to embark on the path of cultivation. Unfortunately, they couldn't say this. At this time, the 7 supreme sovereigns could only say, "Please give us your orders, Your Excellency." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "All right, go back and wait for my orders. Now isn't the time to use you yet. When the time is right, I will let you know." The supreme sovereign's expressions changed slightly. They were already prepared to deal with the pain sooner rather than later. They decided to put everything aside for now and use the shortest amount of time possible to complete Luo Fan's orders and end this nightmare. But they didn't think that the pain would still be the pain. The other party would still have to wait. Who knew how many tens of thousands of years, or how many billions of years before they can make a move? Yes. From now on, we will be on standby as long as we can. As long as we can do it, no matter when Your Excellency orders or summons us, we will not refuse. In the end, the 7 supreme sovereigns could only say this. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and nodded. "That's good. Take care. I won't see you out." The 7 supreme sovereigns sighed. They bowed to Luo Fan and bid farewell. Like stray dogs, half of them fled the gate of primal chaos. They returned to their respective original bodies, which were also where their original bodies were located. Seeing them leave just like that, Luo Fan had an idea. He immediately ordered the Khanate Inextinguishable Spirit Aura. At this time, the 7 Supreme Sovereigns clones who were still persistently sending the Khanate Inextinguishable Spirit Aura to their true bodies wanted to drag their true bodies down with them and become like them, stop what they were doing. To these clones, Luo Fan was a part of the Khanate Inextinguishable Spirit Aura. He was a part of what they wanted. Under such circumstances, they naturally carried out all of Luo Fan's orders without any hesitation. As they came to a stop, the 7 Supreme Emperors felt their bodies loosen up. They no longer felt that terrifying power. In fact, they even felt that the attacks that they couldn't handle suddenly stopped. Instant results. The true bodies of the Supreme Emperors all sighed with emotion. However, as they sighed, their faces were so bitter that water was about to come out. "Taoist Ming Huang, I would like to pay a visit to that good friend of yours. I wonder if you can introduce him to me?" One of the Supreme Sovereigns sent a voice transmission to Ming Huang. For the Supreme Sovereigns, as long as they had seen someone before, they would be able to connect them. It wasn't a difficult task. Although the world was vast and boundless, it was extremely close to a true sage. However, for the Supreme Sovereigns who were tens of thousands of times stronger than a false sage, it wasn't a big deal. Their auras could communicate with each other. Not to mention a few words. Even if they wanted to use their true bodies to communicate and teleport over, it wouldn't be something unbelievable. Following this Supreme Emperor's words, the other Supreme Emperor's messages were also transmitted to the Emperor of Light. Although their words were different, the meaning behind their words was the same. They wanted to get to know Tong Huang, and they wanted Ming Huang to introduce them to him. When Emperor Ming received the message, he fell into a state of hesitation. He wasn't angry that these Supreme Sovereigns didn't listen to his advice and insisted on attacking. The reason for that was because he knew that this was only human nature. In other words, what he was hesitating about wasn't the hatred in his heart. In fact, Ming Huang was hesitating about something else. This matter involved Tong Huang. If the request of the 7 Supreme Emperors only involved himself, and they only wanted him to help out a little, then he would definitely not be stingy with his help, seeing that they were in the same boat. However, this matter involved Tong Huang, so it was different. How would he know if Tong Huang was willing to meet them? If he brought them to disturb Tong Huang and made him unhappy, then wouldn't he lose more than he gained? After a long time, he sighed and said, "Fellow Taoists, you're making things difficult for me." "How is it difficult?" "One more friend means one more path. Although there are many Supreme Sovereigns in the world, we all have our own cultivation paths. There are very few people who are related to each other. Now that we've experienced the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light with that fellow Taoist, it's fate. It's beneficial for us to get to know each other. I'm sure that fellow Taoist won't blame you, right?" These supreme emperors were all intelligent and clear-minded people. Naturally, they could hear the hesitation in the light emperor's voice. One of the supreme emperors said. Hearing this, Ming Huang sighed and said, "Since you've said so, I'll pass on your wishes. If my friend doesn't want to meet you, I hope you can understand." Of course, making friends is something that both parties are willing to do. If the other party isn't willing, then it means we're not fated. What's their blame? Another supreme sovereign said. There was an inexplicable joy in his words. Obviously, although he said that, he didn't think that Tong Huang would be unwilling to meet them. At this level, getting to know another cultivator of the same level was equivalent to having a wider path. If Tong Huang wanted to cultivate, he wouldn't reject these 7 supreme sovereigns. Chapter 1688. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Extraordinary Chaotic Times and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Follow the official account of Qi Dian, add friends on WeChat, add the official account, and enter thread. And tell me secretly. In an instant, Tong Huang, who was still in a state of chaos, received the message, and his expression changed slightly. I didn't expect him to be even more blatant this time. Such a thought instantly appeared in his mind. Of course, he wasn't referring to Emperor Ming and the others, but to Luo Fan. It should be noted that although he seemed to be completely free now, in reality, he was still being suppressed by Luo Fan. He still had to follow Luo Fan's orders and cause trouble for Emperor Ju and the others. Even though this was something he was willing to do, it didn't change the fact that he was doing it under Luo Fan's orders. Therefore, it could be said that although he looked very different from Emperor Ming and the others, and seemed to be many times better than them, but in reality, they were essentially the same. It could be said that the only difference between them was that Luo Fan didn't have any scruples about what Emperor Ming and the others did, and he didn't even try to hide it. Instead, he openly displayed his strength and openly threatened them. As for Tong Huang, he only treated this threat as an invisible threat. Even though they were in the same boat, Tong Huang didn't reject Emperor Ming. His heart skipped a beat. A message was transmitted to Emperor Ming's location through that mysterious connection. When the Light Emperor received the message, he sighed and thanked the Child Emperor. Then, he transmitted the message to the other Supreme Emperors. Not long after, a message of gratitude was transmitted to Emperor Ming through this connection. Immediately after, a wave of space-time fluctuation came and went directly to Emperor Ming. Emperor Ming's heart skipped a beat. He knew that this was a sign of the clones of the Supreme Emperors. Without hesitation, a clone stepped out of his body. In the blink of an eye, he left the cave abode. The moment he left the cave abode, he saw the other 7 Supreme Emperors appearing in front of him. He stood there quietly. Their grasp of time had already reached the pinnacle. Although each of them had come from different parts of the world and had opened up cave abodes that were billions of light years away from each other, if they wanted to gather together now, it would be impossible for them to do so. However, there wasn't even the slightest difference in time. They had already arrived at the same time. When they saw each other again, the 7 of them all had bitter smiles on their faces. Before this, both of them were in high spirits when they met. They had even made a deal and split the profits from the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. But now, when they met again, their identities had completely changed. They had become puppets under the control of a supreme existence. He had already lost his freedom. This sort of feeling was something that these supreme emperors could not help but lament about. It went without saying how difficult it was for people to calm down. Ming Emperor calmed himself down and said to the other supreme sovereigns, "There's not much time left. Let's set off quickly. It wouldn't be good if fellow Taoist Tong Huang waited for too long." Hearing this, expressions of agreement appeared on the faces of the other supreme sovereigns, and they all nodded. "Fellow Taoist, please lead the way." Ming Emperor nodded and said, "Everyone, please follow me." As he spoke, his figure shook, and he casually tore open the void and dashed toward Tong Huang's cave abode. Just like what was mentioned before, although the world was vast and boundless, it was just a small matter to the supreme emperors. As long as they determined the location, It was easy for the supreme sovereigns to travel to that location, no matter where it was. In just a few breaths' time, Ming Emperor had already led the other supreme sovereigns to where Tong Huang's cave abode was located. After arriving at this place, an invisible barrier trembled slightly and appeared. Immediately after, a door appeared above this barrier, leading straight to the depths of a mysterious space. Following this, a voice rang in everyone's ears. "Welcome to my humble abode, fellow Taoists. I'm currently at a crucial stage of my cultivation, so I can't welcome you from afar. Please forgive me, fellow Taoists." Hearing this, Ming Emperor and the others naturally said that they shouldn't have come to visit without notice, and they stepped into the door, heading toward the depths of that space. Compared to the last time Ming Emperor had come, the space inside this cave abode had undergone a complete transformation. At this moment, the entire space seemed to be in order, and the various mysteries that were originally open had been completely restrained, causing this space to look like an ordinary world. In the depths of that space, Tong Huang was still sitting cross-legged in front of a mass of chaos, his eyes staring at that state of chaos. The aura on his body surged, faintly revealing some kind of mysterious profoundness, displaying Tong Huang's extraordinary strength. The moment they saw Tong Huang, the hearts of the other 7 supreme sovereigns trembled, except for Ming Emperor. From Tong Huang's body, they could clearly feel the demonic aura of that supreme sovereign who had instantly made them submit. For a moment, they even thought that this supreme sovereign who looked like a child before them was that person, although this moment passed quickly, allowing them to quickly recognize that the person before them wasn't the person they feared, but Tong Huang. The appearance of this feeling showed that Tong Huang's temperament was somewhat similar to that person's. Looking at their expressions, Tong Huang smiled and said, "Don't you feel that he looks a little familiar?" At this moment, his figure had already shifted to face the crowd without anyone noticing. The scene of chaos was still in front of him, still surging, still displaying all kinds of inconceivable principles. Inconceivable profoundness. Indeed, he looks a little familiar. Ming Emperor sighed. "This is the result of my cultivation," Tong Huang said with a smile. His smile was filled with carefreeness, and the aura that Ming Emperor and the others felt was familiar with became even more intense. "Why is that?" Ming Emperor frowned. "I'm imitating that expert." "You're right about this," Tong Huang said with a sigh. "Fellow Taoist, why are you doing this? Although that expert is many times stronger than us, he isn't a true saint after all. Even if the Tao he cultivates is stronger than us, it isn't by much. If fellow Taoists imitated that expert, in the end, you will only be able to achieve something that looks right, but is actually wrong. Not only will you not be able to reach that expert's level, but you might even affect your own Tao of cultivation because of this kind of imitation. In the end, your Tao will regress." Ming Emperor exclaimed. He originally thought that Tong Huang would have another explanation, but he didn't expect it to be just as he had imagined. This caused him to feel anxious. Hearing this, Tong Huang smiled and said, "If that expert was someone else, this would naturally be the truth. But now, I'm sure that the expert isn't an ordinary Supreme Emperor. He is this generation's true saint seed." This generation's true saint seed. His words caused all the supreme sovereigns present to reveal expressions of disbelief. True saint seed was, of course, not a type of constitution, nor was it a status. It was a special identity. Instead, it was the supreme sovereigns who could turn fake into reality when they had a high chance of breaking through to the next level. It was the title of a true saint. Even if he is much stronger than us, he shouldn't be a true saint seed, right? One of the supreme sovereigns said. Hearing this, Tong Huang smiled. "Fellow Taoist, don't you want to sense it carefully?" As he spoke, an extremely gentle aura was gradually released from his body. This aura was extremely gentle, but it was also extremely vast. Under the envelopment of this aura, even the supreme sovereigns like Ming Emperor felt as if they had returned to their mother's womb. They once again became a state where they didn't need to worry about anything and didn't need to doubt anything. a state where they didn't need to think about anything, a state that was extremely safe and wonderful. In this state, their souls seemed to be extremely relaxed, and they felt extremely free and unfettered. This feeling made them wonder if they had been hypnotized and were trapped in an illusion. However, based on their understanding of illusions and their perception of illusions, it clearly told them that all of this was real. This aura was indeed able to make them feel the feeling that they had yearned for even in their dreams. This feeling lasted for an unknown period of time. When Tong Huang retracted the aura, the feeling disappeared from everyone's perception, causing them to feel a sense of loss. Did anyone feel it? Tong Huang asked calmly. This is the path of a true saint, Ming Emperor murmured. At this moment, he was still reminiscing about that wonderful feeling from before, and he hadn't regained his senses yet. This kind of answer was merely an instinctive response. That's right, it's a true saint. Even a false saint realm supreme sovereign wouldn't be able to give off such a feeling. Another supreme sovereign said, I didn't expect fellow Taoists to have already reached this level, but you've already left us far behind. Another supreme sovereign sighed. His words were filled with indescribable regret and shock. Fellow Taoists, you've overestimated me, Tong Huang said with a bitter smile. This aura isn't my real aura. It's something that I've forcefully simulated. This is only 1 or 2% of that expert's real aura. Tong Huang sighed, his voice filled with indescribable shock and fear. How is this possible? We've fought against him before, his aura. Ming Emperor instinctively wanted to refute. However, he quickly recalled something. That was, although these supreme sovereigns had fought against Luo Fan before, Luo Fan had always suppressed all of them with ease, leaving them with no ability to resist at all. In the end, they could only choose to surrender to protect their real bodies. Throughout all of this, none of them had truly sensed Luo Fan's aura, and they didn't truly understand how powerful Luo Fan was. How terrifying! Very quickly, the other Supreme Emperors also revealed looks of astonishment. They had originally overestimated Luo Fan to the point that they were willing to surrender in exchange for the safety of their real bodies. But now that they thought about it, what they'd seen of Luo Fan's strength was actually just the tip of the iceberg. The other party didn't even release his real aura without hesitation. This realization made Ming Emperor and the other 7 supreme sovereigns feel discouraged and helpless. It was a kind of lingering fear. Looks like we didn't lose unjustly. Ming Emperor sighed. Indeed, we didn't lose unjustly. However, this also means that the possibility of us escaping is almost non-existent. Another supreme sovereign sighed. His voice was filled with deep exhaustion. Another supreme sovereign suddenly asked Tong Huang, could it be that fellow Taoist has personally sensed that expert's real aura? Forgive me for being blunt, but although fellow Taoist is strong, I think you're only slightly stronger than us. Judging from that expert's performance, he wouldn't have revealed his real aura in front of you. Hearing this, Tong Huang didn't get angry at being looked down upon. Instead, he sighed and said, what fellow Taoist said makes sense. It's true that I've never forced that expert to reveal his real strength and aura. But back then, I made the same mistake as all of you. In fact, the mistake I made was even worse than all of you. My clone was completely refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light and became a part of it. After that, after I retrieved my clone, I obtained countless information and mysteries from it. Only then did I get a glimpse of the tip of the iceberg of that supreme sovereign. I was able to deduce his real aura. Fellow Taoists also made the same mistake. Other than Ming Emperor, the other supreme sovereigns couldn't help but exclaim. Regarding the fact that his clone had been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light and became a part of it, Tong Huang had only told Ming Emperor about it. Before this, Tong Huang had only told Ming Emperor about the fact that his clone had been controlled by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Although Ming Emperor had told them many things about the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, he hadn't told them about the fact that Tong Huang had been refined because it involved Tong Huang's privacy. That was why the current situation was like this. Yes, only Ming Emperor knew what Tong Huang was talking about. That's right. A thought flashed across Tong Huang's mind. He had already understood what was going on and couldn't help but smile. Tong Huang had already gotten over this dark history, but he didn't mind letting others know about it. In fact, he was still feeling inexplicably glad about this dark history. Although this dark history caused him to be controlled by others, and it was difficult for him to obtain true freedom. However, this gave him a huge opportunity. It allowed him to see the direction he should head in. It allowed him to understand how far he was from a true divine and which direction he should work towards. And this was exchanged for a little bit of freedom. It was really too cheap and worth it. Then how did fellow Taoist escape? Fellow Taoist should have escaped by now, right? One of the supreme sovereigns asked. Hearing this, Tong Huang only smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, you should understand." These words stunned the supreme sovereigns. Then they all smiled bitterly. That's right, they should understand. Apart from that expert's method, what other reason could have allowed Tong Huang to escape? After understanding this, the originally wishful thinking in their hearts was completely shattered. Fellow Taoists, I already know why you're here. If you don't mind, why don't we have a discussion here? Tong Huang said to the supreme emperors. As for introducing each other, that was just a formality. They were all supreme sovereigns with extraordinary intelligence. As long as they glanced at each other, they would be able to match each other with the missions they heard. Under such circumstances, introducing each other and getting to know each other was, of course, completely unnecessary. Hearing this, the supreme sovereigns were naturally overjoyed. They came here to ask Tong Huang, who was already experienced, if there was any way for them to escape. Now, they didn't receive such information. Although a Tao discussion wasn't the result they wanted the most, it was still a surprise that they had been dreaming of. After everyone agreed, Tong Huang smiled, and an auspicious cloud appeared above his head. This magic cloud surged endlessly above his head. Boundless light and shadows appeared within it, condensing into countless profound principles and mysteries. If Luo Fan focused his attention here, he would definitely be able to discover it. Although the light and shadow in this auspicious cloud was different from the auspicious cloud he released, it was different from the one he released. However, the way it surged, the profoundness and the combination of principles were extremely similar to his own auspicious clouds. From this point of view, Tong Huang's imitation of Luo Fan had already reached a certain level. From this point of view, Tong Huang's imitation of Luo Fan had already reached a certain level. Regarding the changes here, Luo Fan obviously didn't expect this. Back then, he returned Tong Huang's clone to Tong Huang and gave him freedom. That was only because back then, he was too lazy to restrain Tong Huang. He would rather give Tong Huang freedom and let him cause trouble for Zhu Huang and the others as he pleased. It was just a dog biting another dog. At most, he had guessed that Tong Huang would comprehend many principles and mysteries related to the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light from the clone that he had returned to Tong Huang, which would allow his cultivation to improve a little. However, he didn't expect Tong Huang to deduce his true strength through his clone. What's more, he didn't expect Tong Huang to think that there was a high possibility that Tong Huang was a true sage seed. Therefore, Tong Huang imitated him and wanted to break through his limits by imitating him. His goal was to surpass the realm that he had been dreaming of. Actually, Tong Huang's idea was extremely ridiculous, imitating others, but it was impossible for him to become a true sage. Even if he was imitating a true sage, it was still the same. Not to mention, he was only imitating a true sage seed that no one knew was real or fake. It should be noted that the reason why Luo Fan was able to reach where he was today was because he could clearly see the direction of becoming a true sage. This was the fundamental reason. It wasn't because he had comprehended many mysteries from the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light or obtained many principles from the state of chaos. The fundamental reason, it was because he had his own unique worldview that he completely agreed with. This was the key to his cultivation. Apart from this, everything else was secondary. In fact, it could even be said that everything was derived from this unique worldview. However, this was something that Tong Huang obviously didn't know. His imitation of Luo Fan was completely based on his own understanding of the world and his own path of cultivation. He had no concept of what worldview was at all. He didn't even realize that Luo Fan's worldview was fundamentally different from his. Under such circumstances, his imitation was destined to be a tragedy. Of course, even though it was a tragedy in the end, it didn't mean that this kind of imitation wasn't beneficial to Tong Huang. On the contrary, because of this imitation, Tong Huang's current strength was more than 100 times stronger than before. It was just like how he could use classical mechanics to calculate the appearance of the solar system and the positions of the 9 planets at every moment when he couldn't understand more precise and profound theories like quantum mechanics and relativity. Even though their foundations were different, Luo Fan's various performances already contained endless principles and all kinds of indescribable mysteries. By imitating him, Tong Huang was naturally able to obtain these principles and these mysteries, which in turn allowed him to improve. Seeing Tong Huang releasing the auspicious clouds, the other Supreme Emperors released their own auspicious clouds with great sincerity and intertwined with Tong Huang's auspicious clouds. They constantly clashed, collided, and assimilated, causing the light of wisdom to flicker wildly between the auspicious clouds. This caused the 8 Supreme Emperors to feel that their understanding of heaven and earth, their understanding of cultivation, and their understanding of true sages had inexplicably improved during this process. This also caused Tong Huang to feel that his imitation of Luo Fan was getting deeper and deeper. The various mysteries of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that he had obtained from the doppelganger were also gradually fusing with him and becoming his own. While Tong Huang and the others were discussing Tao in this cave abode, in the Gate of Chaos, Luo Fan had already entered the world that was most suitable for his current cultivation, which was the 4th level world. Chapter 1689. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Extraordinary Primeval World and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Follow the official account, WeChat add friends, add the official account, type DD, and tell me secretly. It was precisely because of this consideration. Therefore, Luo Fan naturally needed to increase the cultivation realm of his physical body as much as possible. And it was only natural for him to increase his cultivation realm and enter a world that was compatible with his current cultivation realm of his physical body. The endless world within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was divided into 9 levels according to the profoundness contained in it. The 4th level was close to the center of the 9 levels. Similar to the other worlds of different levels, this world looked extremely ordinary and did not reveal anything special. However, after careful observation and sensing, one could tell that the profoundness contained in this world was almost all the profoundness of the worlds below the 3rd level that he had experienced before. Even though none of the 5 worlds of Luo Fan's false saints were involved in this 4th level world, after stepping into this world, he could still sense all kinds of inexplicable responses from this world that were transmitted to his physical body. This feeling was completely different from when he entered the 9th level world. Indeed, the higher the level, the better. Only the most suitable for me is the best for me. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. This level 4 world was completely different from the level 9 world, which made him have a deeper understanding of this point. The current Luo Fan had already formed an indescribable resonance with the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and had become its master in a certain form. The difference in their relationship made him want to cultivate. That feeling was already completely different from before. After he entered this 4th level world, in a single breath, endless profoundness was released from the great Tao of this world and slowly injected into his physical body. It was quickly guided by the cultivation method of his physical body and continuously pushed this cultivation method forward. It evolved in the direction of becoming stronger. This method of directly refining profoundness was something that he could not do in the past. With a thought, Luo Fan suddenly revealed an inexplicable smile on his face. It was at this moment that he had an indescribable inspiration. With this inspiration, he raised his hand and gently patted his body. With this pat, his body trembled slightly. Suddenly, an indescribable power surged out of nowhere and began to roam inside and outside of his body, moving continuously. Before long, an indescribable object shot out from the top of his head as his power trembled. This mass of things was so mysterious. It was so unbelievable. The void constantly twisted and spiraled, as if countless worlds were being born and destroyed. There were also endless words, runes, diagrams, and many other things that were constantly spiraling and evolving. After this mass appeared, it began to emit some kind of invisible light. This light engulfed the entire world in the blink of an eye, causing all space-time and everything in this world to disappear. They were all wrapped up in this light. Next, the world connected directly to the void. It connected through space-time and seeped directly into the unseen world. It enveloped the great Tao of this world and began to suck out endless profoundness from the great Tao as if it was sucking blood. It was then transferred to this mass of things through the light. This caused the various lights and shadows within this mass of things to undergo indescribable changes. It was as if it was growing indescribably because of the many nutrients and the lights and shadows. It can really be like this. Luo Fan looked up at this mass of things and smiled. This mass of things was indescribable. It was none other than the cultivation method of his flesh and blood body. The higher the level of things, the more mysterious they were. This seemed to be the case for cultivation methods. If it were the martial arts methods of mortals, they would just be ordinary things that could be recorded on ordinary paper. There was nothing mysterious or special about them. No matter how it was changed or destroyed, as long as it could be reassembled in the end, it would be a perfect cultivation method. However, if it were the cultivation method of a cultivator who had yet to become an immortal, it would be different. That was not a mysterious method that could be recorded on ordinary paper. Only some special power or special materials could be used as a carrier to record it. After it was recorded, it could naturally emit an inexplicable power that could affect any living being that looked at it. According to the different nature of the cultivation method, it would produce all kinds of unimaginable consequences. In fact, even if it was destroyed or messed up, it would cause serious consequences, causing it to have to be reassembled and sorted out before it could be used again. Otherwise, its power would be greatly reduced. If the level of the cultivation method was raised to the level of an immortal, the changes would be even more mysterious than the cultivation method of an ordinary cultivator. Its power would be even more terrifying, and it would be even more difficult to reassemble it after it was destroyed. Just like that, the higher the level, the more mysterious the cultivation method would be. And when the level of the cultivation method was raised to the level of Luo Fan's flesh and blood body, which was the level of the multi-world false sage, this cultivation method had already become some kind of indescribable, special living being. This kind of living being had the instinct to evolve on its own and the desire to work hard to improve itself. It could also exist independently and form an indescribable whole. If it was attacked, it might even launch a counterattack. This was the characteristic of such a multi-world false sage-level cultivation technique. These various characteristics allowed Luo Fan's current cultivation method of flesh and blood to be able to separate from his body in an extremely inconceivable manner and directly take form in the sky. Then, it started to absorb the boundless profundities to strengthen itself and evolve itself. However, this wasn't without any restrictions. If this world had not yet resonated with Luo Fan's flesh and blood, even if Luo Fan clearly knew that this cultivation method had such characteristics, he would not have been able to do so. It could evolve and improve naturally without needing him to interfere or take any action. He would never do that. That was because this cultivation method was only a cultivation method after all. Even if there were all kinds of unbelievable powers and unimaginable abilities, it could not change the fact that it was a cultivation method. This was a reality. This made it extremely easy for this cultivation method to be seized by others. If any Supreme Emperor took advantage of the time when the cultivation technique was empty and directly attacked to seize this cultivation technique, the cultivation technique would resist a little because the nature of the emperor who seized it was different from the emperor, and it would show various signs of resistance. However, this was nothing compared to the strength of a supreme emperor. They did not need to go through too much trouble. As long as they had the strength to force any other supreme emperor to retreat, they would be able to destroy the resistance of this cultivation method and then take it for themselves. Even if that was the case, it was unlikely that these supreme emperors would be able to reach the same realm as Luo Fan's flesh and blood through this cultivation method that was completely suitable for Luo Fan. It was also impossible for them to rely on this cultivation method to obtain their true Tao. However, it would definitely be beneficial to them and would be enough to become resources for them to comprehend their own Tao. Therefore, at that time, Luo Fan had never thought of releasing this cultivation method. He wanted to grow on its own. However, it was different now. To a certain extent, he had already become the owner of this natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. Almost all the power within the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light was under his control. Under such circumstances, he only needed to slightly mobilize the power of this natural, inextinguishable spiritual light to protect this cultivation method, and no Supreme Emperor would be able to break through its defense. To obtain this cultivation method, it was precisely because he understood this that Luo Fan had the idea of releasing this cultivation method to grow on its own. He was also truly sure that this cultivation method really had such an ability. Looking at the cultivation method above his head that was constantly changing and growing, Luo Fan finally heaved a sigh of relief. He was rather busy now. Not only did he need this cultivation method to grow, but he also needed to comprehend the state of chaos. He also needed to move the connate, inextinguishable spirit light away. He didn't have much time to waste on this seemingly endless process of cultivating this cultivation method and nurturing his body of flesh and blood. Now that he could let this cultivation method grow on its own, he could completely free his mind to do other things. To him, this was naturally a great thing. How could he not feel much more relaxed? After taking a look at the cultivation method, Luo Fan did not waste any time. With a thought, among the endless worlds within the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, countless worlds began to emit boundless light. These lights rapidly gathered from all directions in the fourth-tier world that Luo Fan was currently in. In the blink of an eye, they had completely broken through the barriers of the worlds and directly arrived at where Luo Fan was. They began to quickly gather around the cultivation method. Of course, these lights were not the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. Although the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light was the easiest to gather from the countless worlds, it clearly did not mean that only the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light could be gathered from the various worlds. These lights were impressively a part of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. Of course, it was only an extremely insignificant and small part. These endless lights gathered in one place and finally formed a small stream of natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. In fact, compared to the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light that Tong Huang had unleashed when he was refined by the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light and possessed by the will of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, it was countless times smaller. However, that was the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, after all. Its own nature determined that it was many levels higher than any other supreme emperor. After this insignificant, innate spirit light appeared, it slightly rotated and directly wrapped Luo Fan's fleshly body cultivation technique in that spirit light. Immediately after, the spiritual light shook slightly and a powerful force seeped out from it. It directly turned the cultivation method into an illusory shadow and no longer existed. After a brief test, Luo Fan nodded in satisfaction. Now, even if it was him, before this small stream of natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, it would be difficult for him to come into contact with the cultivation method of the physical body. If even he could not do it, he did not believe that any other Supreme Emperor would be able to do it. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved it lightly. In an instant, in a certain world within the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, Ming Huang, who was enjoying the fun of walking around in that world, felt a call from Luo Fan. He took a step forward, and his figure directly traversed through layers of time and space, directly arriving in the world where Luo Fan was appearing not far from Luo Fan. Try and see if you can seize this cultivation method. Luo Fan looked at Ming Huang, who had already been refined by the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, and said calmly, Ming Huang had already been refined by the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. His thoughts and actions were all based on the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. From the perspective of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, to him, Luo Fan, who had resonated with the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, to a certain extent, could represent the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. Therefore, no matter what order Luo Fan gave, even if he wanted him to commit suicide or to plot against his own body, he would not hesitate to execute it. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan wanted him to try and seize the cultivation method. Naturally, he would not have the slightest hesitation. Nodding his head, Ming Huang immediately acted. Suddenly, rays of spiritual light gushed out from his body and turned into a palm in the void, directly reaching for the cultivation method. The palm formed by the spiritual light flashed with a faint white radiance. Within it, there were bits and pieces of eternal indestructibility. It had the charm of being indestructible by 10,000 tribulations. Obviously, it had the innate characteristic of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. After the palm was formed, the entire world trembled slightly, as if the appearance of the spiritual light palm had already caused all sorts of subtle changes. At this moment, Luo Fan could clearly feel that there was a faint change in the great Tao of this world. In this world, there seemed to be some kind of change in the great Tao. It was as if the appearance of the hand had activated something, causing the great Tao to become even more resplendent and mysterious. As expected of a fourth-level world, compared to ordinary worlds, it has a stronger endurance. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The changes in the world before him clearly showed that the power of the spiritual light palm had broken through the limits of ordinary worlds, causing the potential of this world to be slightly stimulated, releasing a power that was stronger than ordinary worlds. Of course, this kind of power could not last long. Once the spiritual light palm disappeared, the entire group of worlds, or rather, the power of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, would naturally calm down this change, allowing this world to return to its original appearance. This place would no longer be any different from before. Although these thoughts took a long time, to Luo Fan, it was just a flash. Almost in the blink of an eye, he had already understood everything. At this moment, the spiritual light palm had already reached into the tiny connate, inextinguishable spirit light that Luo Fan had condensed, grabbing at the cultivation method on Luo Fan's body. However, at this moment, the connate, inextinguishable spirit light trembled slightly, and an indescribable power poured into the spiritual light palm, causing the connate, inextinguishable spirit light on the spiritual light palm to suddenly freeze and then completely disperse, as if it had never appeared. This scene looked like after the palm reached into the tiny connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Its power seemed to increase greatly, and endless light suddenly shone out. If someone who didn't know what was going on saw this, they might praise Emperor Ming's superb methods. However, it was a pity that this was clearly not the case. At this moment, under the effect of the tiny connate, inextinguishable spirit light, the spiritual light palm trembled, and bits of spiritual light began to scatter in all directions. In the end, the entire spiritual light palm was like a pile of fine sand, and it began to scatter in all directions. In the blink of an eye, It had already disappeared without a trace at this moment. There was a trace of shock in Emperor Ming's eyes. Amidst this shock, he did not hesitate to attack again. An endless spiritual light surged out from his body. Along with this spiritual light, from the endless world inside the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, countless rays of light and power surged out, and they began to rapidly condense around this world. In the blink of an eye, the endless power had already condensed together with the spiritual light around Emperor Ming's body. At this moment, the spiritual light began to change. It began to change rapidly. Its structure began to undergo an earth-shattering change. Countless tiny space and time were formed within the spiritual light. In just a short instant, this originally pure spiritual light had already transformed into a different existence. It had transformed into a simulated connate, inextinguishable spirit light. For a supreme emperor like Emperor Ming, being refined by this connate, inextinguishable spirit light was indeed a misfortune. It was a fate of losing one's fundamental freedom, and it was a fate that most supreme emperors would rather die than suffer. However, at the same time, this process also caused the mysteries of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light to pour into the depths of these supreme emperors' memories at an indescribable speed, fusing with their instincts. This allowed them to obtain the endless mysteries of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light without going through arduous comprehension, and without needing to comprehend it for a long time. These various mysteries that were naturally poured in were not enough for Emperor Ming to directly construct the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. However, it was enough for him to construct the simulated connate, inextinguishable spirit light, just like now. After the simulated connate, inextinguishable spirit light appeared, this fourth-level world began to undergo even greater changes. In the void, there were even bits and pieces of light gushing out. The laws and principles of this world began to become more and more complicated and mysterious during this process, and the great Tao became even brighter. Among them, the connate, inextinguishable spirit light that was originally lying in the depths of the great Tao seemed to be in a deep sleep. The endless mysteries seemed to have been awakened at this moment, and it began to produce all sorts of incredible powers. It caused all sorts of jaw-dropping consequences. At this moment, all the living beings in this entire world could feel that this entire world was undergoing this indescribable change. All sorts of guesses, fears, and excitement began to spread throughout this entire world at this moment. I didn't expect such a change to occur when a stronger power enters this high-level world. This connate, inextinguishable spirit light is really mysterious. Luo Fan looked at this scene, and an indescribable feeling appeared on his face. Although he had entered many high-level worlds, he had never really fought with any existences in this high-level world. Even before and after the discussion with the Ju Huang, he had only used words to exchange blows and did not really fight. Even before and after discussing the Tao with Ju Huang, they had only exchanged words and hadn't really fought. Therefore, he only found out about it now. It turned out that the reason why high-level worlds behaved so normally was because they did not have enough power to activate them. At this moment, he suddenly had an inexplicable thought. Just a little bit of power has caused this world to change. If I use some truly powerful means to completely activate this entire world and release all of its potential, what will the result be? With this in mind, he suddenly felt a little eager to try. At this moment, the innate spirit light, condensed by Light's sovereign, turned into a long river and condensed in the void. Then, a hand reached out from the long river and grabbed the cultivation technique. Although this palm was similar in nature to the palm formed by the spirit light from before, due to the difference in structure, there is a world of difference. Previously, when the palm of spirit light reached into the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, the essence of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light was almost instantly expelled by the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light, causing the innate, inextinguishable spirit light to lose any power to protect it. Even the spirit light was directly shattered and erased. However, At this moment, the palm formed by the innate inextinguishable spirit light forcibly reached into the innate inextinguishable spirit light, forcibly breaking through the layers of obstacles and grabbing at the cultivation technique of Luo Fan's flesh and blood body. This process was very difficult and very slow. However, compared to before, it was already a lot better. At least, it did not shatter the moment it entered the innate inextinguishable spirit light. Seeing this, Luo Fan put away the various thoughts in his mind and focused his gaze on the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Of course, he only looked at it. At this moment, he did not make any movements, not even his thoughts to control the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Can I block it or not? This thought flashed through his mind. Chapter 1690. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Extraordinary Primitive Times and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Follow the official account, WeChat, add friends, add the official account, type DD, and tell me secretly. At this moment, the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light suddenly flickered violently. Less than or equal to top, less than or equal to, thin or equal to small, thin or equal to say. As it flickered, the innate, inextinguishable spirit light changed subtly every time, as if it was about to condense into something indescribable. Amidst these changes, the palm formed by the simulated innate, inextinguishable spirit light began to collapse. Bits and pieces of the simulated innate, inextinguishable spirit light scattered in all directions. Facing this change, the Light Emperor, who had been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, took action. He raised his hand and pointed at the river of simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Waves surged on the long river, and countless simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light began to pour into the palm formed by the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light, frantically increasing the power of the palm. During this process, the palm began to gradually recover. This recovery and the collapse of the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light formed a cycle, causing the palm to continuously collapse and recover at the same time. It was like a seesaw. At this moment, the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light grew larger and more obvious. The outline of a strange, unknown object began to gradually appear on the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. This is going to condense into a primal origin spiritual treasure. A bolt of lightning suddenly flashed in Luo Fan's mind, and an unbelievable idea was born in his mind. That's impossible. After that thought, he quickly had another idea. The innate, inextinguishable spirit light had two uses, at least for cultivators. That was the case. First, it could be integrated into one's original life source. As a result, one's original life source could become an eternal and indestructible supreme existence, becoming a true sage in a certain form. Second, it could evolve naturally, or it could be promoted through various other methods, and finally turn into a real, undiminished primal origin spiritual treasure. However, no matter which of these two uses, it would be extremely difficult to achieve. If one wanted to refine the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, it could only be done when the innate, inextinguishable spirit light was still in its original state. However, even in its primitive state, it would take a lot of effort to fuse it with the origin of life. One would need to absorb it into one's life essence and nurture it for countless trillions of years. The time required was even longer than cultivating from zero to becoming a true sage. And in order for this connate, inextinguishable spirit light to evolve into a primordial origin spirit treasure, it was necessary. Time was also extremely long. Moreover, once it evolved, it would inevitably become a true primordial essence spirit treasure. The only exception would be if it was nourished during the evolution process, constantly incorporating his own mark into it. Only then would it be possible for it to become a cultivator's magic treasure after its final evolution. Otherwise, only a true saint would be able to refine a primordial origin spirit treasure that had evolved. These two uses were clearly impossible for the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light before him. That was because the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had already started to evolve. It had now become a group of worlds formed by countless worlds. It was already strong enough to repel everything. At most, it could only be refined in such a way, turning it into a different form of magic treasure. Even so, Luo Fan's conjecture still needed to be correct in order to achieve that. It was precisely because of this reason that Luo Fan had never wanted to fuse the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light with his origin of life or evolve it into a true primordial origin spirit treasure. He planned to. However, at this moment, the development of the matter was somewhat beyond his expectations. At this moment, the tiny connate, inextinguishable spiritual light that he had split out actually showed faint signs of condensing into a primordial origin spirit treasure. Although it was only wisps and wisps, the condensed form was also extremely illusory and unstable. However, there were signs after all, turning something that was originally impossible into a possibility. For Luo Fan, it was easy to imagine how pleasantly surprised it was. Looks like the stimulation wasn't enough. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan did not hesitate to summon the remaining 7 supreme emperors who had been refined by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. These 7 supreme emperors were originally walking around like Emperor Ming, feeling the wonderful state of mind after being refined by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. When they suddenly received Luo Fan's order, they could not help but be astonished. However, as mentioned before, Luo Fan was now the embodiment of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light in their eyes. They naturally did not dare to disobey his orders. Immediately, these 7 supreme emperors traversed through time and space, arriving in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye, standing beside Emperor Ming. You all should also seize this cultivation method, like Emperor Ming did, Luo Fan ordered calmly. Seize the cultivation method. The supreme emperors were shocked. As the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light poured into the long river suddenly expanded by more than 7 times. Moreover, due to the different simulations stimulating and complementing each other, the light on the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light became purer and more similar to the real connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. This was actually equivalent to a form of Tao discussion. These simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual lights were the manifestation of the 8 supreme emperors' understanding of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. These simulations were different because of the different cultivation methods of each person. There were also various differences between the simulations. There were even conflicts. And when these differences and conflicts were combined, they naturally had a deeper understanding of the characteristics of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As a result, all of their simulations of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light became more and more similar to the real connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light grew stronger and stronger, the small connate, inextinguishable spiritual light that Luo Fan had condensed became more and more intense. The countless worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light began to gradually collapse and turn into pure spiritual light. Along with this change, the outline of the object condensed from the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light also became more and more real, more and more clear. Finally, it appeared in front of Luo Fan. Finally, it truly appeared in front of Luo Fan. Finally, it appeared in front of Luo Fan. It was a mirror that had yet to be determined. It was constantly fluctuating as if it could collapse and disappear at any time, but it also seemed like it could condense into a solid mirror at any time. And at this time, the palm formed from the simulated connate, inextinguishable spiritual light pressed on the mirror. It wanted to reach into the mirror and grab the cultivation method that existed in the depths of the mirror. At the point of contact between the two, a strong impact was constantly released. It constantly shook the surrounding world and affected the great Tao of this world. It caused the great Tao of this world to continuously release light and fluctuations during this process, causing the entire world to begin to continuously increase in level. It allowed the cultivators in this world to clearly sense that the world had become more and more vast and profound. It allowed the false saints in that world to feel that they had already reached their limits. It seemed like there was still a huge space for them to improve to the false saints of this world. They were originally already standing at the peak of this world. All the principles and mysteries in this world were like looking at the lines on their palms to them. At least, they felt that it was as clear as looking at the lines on their palms. It was as clear as looking at the lines on their palms. It was precisely because of this. Before this, even if they wanted to continue to improve and cultivate, they couldn't find a way or direction at all. But at this time, the situation was different. At this time, they all felt that the world in front of them, which was originally under their control, had already broken away from their control. What they had originally comprehended and thought that they had already comprehended the mysteries of this world suddenly became so insignificant, as if they had only occupied a 10,000th of this world. This naturally allowed them to feel the existence of the space for improvement and the direction to move forward. It was a pity that this feeling couldn't last long for these false saints. Once the conflict at Luo Fan's location disappeared, the world would return to its original state. Most of the mysteries and potential of the great Tao would go back to sleep, as if they didn't exist. They wouldn't be able to detect them at all. And to these false saints, this was obviously a disaster that would make it impossible for them to advance anymore. Even if the false saints weren't as good as the Supreme Emperors, they wouldn't be idiots. The strength of his intelligence and deduction ability was naturally self-evident. At this time, all kinds of thoughts flashed through the minds of the false saints, but they vaguely guessed that the current changes might not last long. They guessed that the space and direction they could sense would very likely disappear without a trace very soon. However, under such circumstances, none of them began to cultivate immediately. Instead, they began to try hard to remember this feeling. They tried hard to remember the direction of their cultivation so that they could continue to cultivate according to their memories and progress according to their memories after the world returned to its original state. Even though it would be extremely difficult for them to improve their cultivation if they did that, it would be extremely shocking. But compared to not being able to find the direction at all, it was still countless times better. Under such circumstances, how would these false saints have the time and energy to find the source of the changes? It was also because of this that Luo Fan was currently experimenting in the void somewhere in this world, but no false saints came to disturb him. Even their spying gazes or senses didn't sweep past this place. Although Luo Fan didn't divert much attention to observe all these changes, just by sensing the changes in this world, he had already instinctively deduced all sorts of things. At this moment, he wasn't surprised at all. At this moment, his eyes were more focused on the primordial origin spiritual treasure that was taking shape. The simulated innate indestructible spiritual light that Emperor Ming and the other 7 had released continuously exerted force at this moment. Its power began to increase rapidly, causing the palm to perform better and better as it collided with the tiny innate indestructible spiritual light. In the beginning, the palm that was condensed from the simulated innate indestructible spiritual light continued to shatter, and countless tiny fragments flew everywhere. However, as time passed, those fragments became fewer and fewer. The damage suffered by the palm also became smaller and smaller. In the end, even all the fragments stopped splattering. Instead, there were only traces of cracks appearing on the palm, causing wounds to appear on the palm. Moreover, the scars on his body were continuously decreasing. If he were to deduce in this direction, the palm might really be able to break through the defense of the innate indestructible spiritual light in the end, reach into the mirror outline, and grab the cultivation technique. Facing such a scene, Luo Fan wasn't worried at all. On the contrary, the anticipation in his eyes grew. Of course, it wasn't because he enjoyed the feeling of being abused, but because he clearly knew that the potential of the innate indestructible spiritual light was limitless. the more pressure there was, the more potential the innate, indestructible spiritual light could release. If the palm could really break through the innate, indestructible spiritual light, the innate, indestructible spiritual light would definitely release incredible power. In the end, it might even directly condense into a magic treasure, and there was even a possibility that this mirror-like primordial origin spiritual treasure would completely take shape. How could he not be looking forward to this? Sure enough, it was just as Luo Fan had thought. As the pressure from the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light increased, the tiny, innate, indestructible spiritual light really underwent a great change. The originally constantly changing silhouette began to gradually stabilize. That blurry silhouette, the blurry figure, also gradually became clearer. This change caused its power to continuously increase. The pressure on the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light also continued to increase, and this instead caused the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light to continuously increase in power, causing the power of the palm formed by the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light to continuously increase, causing the pressure on the tiny, innate, indestructible spiritual light to increase again. This formed a kind of virtuous cycle, causing the power of both sides to continuously increase. The final result of this was that the two sides formed a stalemate. And in this world, however, as it became more and more profound, the great Tao of this world released more and more dazzling brilliance, causing those false sages to feel pain and happiness at the same time. There was no limit to the improvement of the innate, indestructible spiritual light. However, there was a limit to the improvement of the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light. There is also a limit to the improvement of this world. The limit of the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light. This was the limit of the supreme emperors like Emperor Ming. It was the limit of their understanding of the mysteries of the innate, indestructible spiritual light. And the limit of this world was the limit of a level 4 world. When the power of the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light reached the limit of the wisdom of the supreme emperors like Emperor Ming, causing them to be unable to understand the mysteries of the innate, indestructible spiritual light to strengthen the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light, the power of the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light would reach its limit. And similarly, when the great Tao of this world was raised to the level of a level 4 world, this world would also reach its limit. And once it reached its limit, the palm formed by the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light will be crushed by the power of the infinitely increased innate, indestructible spiritual light. And this world would also experience all kinds of destruction because of this. What Luo Fan hoped now was that this world could reach its limit after the simulated innate, indestructible spiritual light was raised to its limit. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have to move to a world that was not the most suitable for his cultivation to carry out this experiment. Time passed slowly. Unknowingly, a year had passed. At a certain moment after a year, cracking sounds suddenly came from all parts of this world. Oh no, this world has reached its limit. At this moment, Luo Fan understood what was going on. As his eyes narrowed, he had already discovered that in this world, the first crack had appeared on the great Tao that was originally constantly improving and emitting all kinds of inexplicable light. Endless mysteries were quickly awakening and activating. It was an extremely tiny crack that would almost be missed if one did not have outstanding eyesight. Although this crack was small, its appearance represented a fact that Luo Fan did not want to see, and that was that this world could no longer withstand his experiment here. At this moment, cracking sounds rang in the ears of the countless living beings everywhere in this world. The crack of the great Tao was the foundation of their existence for the many living beings in this world. The crack was the source of their existence. The crack was the source of their existence. This would naturally appear in their ears. At the same time, the hearts of the many false saints in this world trembled at this moment. They felt an extremely strong sense of danger from the bottom of their hearts. What's going on? Is this world going to be destroyed? At this moment, such a thought appeared in the minds of these false saints. The destruction of the great Tao would mean the destruction of the world. And the destruction of the world was a disaster for these false saints who were only false saints in this world. No matter where they went, they would definitely be destroyed along with the destruction of this world. At this stage, how could these false saints dare to continue staying here quietly and memorize the direction of their cultivation method? However, they released their senses one by one to search the world, searching for the source of all the changes. When Luo Fan came to this world, although he didn't reveal himself without concealment, because he didn't want to plot anything here, he didn't hide himself too much. These false saints were the false saints of this world. Their ability to sense this world had reached an indescribable level. After a crazy search, they finally found some traces that Luo Fan had leaked out. He had actually locked on a Luo Fan's location with his weak body. At this moment, the fake saints quickly rushed over from various cave abodes, wanting to see for themselves what exactly was happening here. As they sensed and moved, the cracking sounds coming from the Great Path continued to ring out. The cracks on the Great Tao also continued to increase and expand at the moment when the false saints were about to arrive. An incomparably strange feeling swept over them. At this moment, the sense of danger that filled their hearts suddenly disappeared. The cracking sounds that came from the Great Tao and were heard by countless living beings and cultivators in this world also disappeared. At the same time, the Great Tao, it began to heal rapidly and dim. Almost at the moment when the false saints reacted, everything returned to before the changes. When the false saints could not sense the direction of their advance at all and could not sense the room for improvement, the changes have stopped? All the false saints felt lost at this moment. At the same time, there was an indescribable frustration gradually brewing in their hearts, making them wish that they could destroy the entire world. If they had not sensed that there was still room for improvement and the direction to continue improving, they would still be able to enjoy this extreme and peak state. However, after sensing that state, they had to get rid of that state and once again fall into a state where they could no longer advance or cultivate. To them, this was as painful as stuffing a whale in the ocean into a tiny pond. Fortunately, these false saints were existences with great wisdom after all. Although this frustration was brewing, it was quickly eliminated by them, preventing them from putting this destructive desire into reality. What a pity! An inexplicable sigh came from the mouths of these false saints. In the end, they could only shake their heads, turn around, and return to their cave abodes, returning to their original cultivation places. From then on, this world fell into a state of no saints for a long time. The number of false saints, who were originally quite large and would receive an edict every once in a while, acted as if they did not exist. They hid themselves and no longer cared about the affairs of the world. The reason for this was self-explanatory. They were trying their best to dig out their room for improvement and find a direction for improvement based on their previous memories. After all, this was a level 4 world. Even though many mysteries were hidden in the Great Tao and had not been activated or revealed, this would not change the nature of a level 4 world. Chapter 1691. Just as the pseudo-sages once again fell into a state where they could no longer advance, Luo Fan had already moved to another place with Emperor Ming and the others. Or rather, he was in another world. Although the quality of a level 4 world was extremely high, it still couldn't withstand the potential stimulation of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Previously, when the world couldn't withstand it, and even the great Tao in it began to crack and was about to collapse, the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had yet to reach their peak. Both of them still had great potential that hadn't been unleashed. In such a situation, Luo Fan clearly knew that if he continued to stay in the level 4 world, what awaited him would be Emperor Ming, and the other supreme emperors would no longer listen to his orders. They would no longer continue to attack the tiny, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and would no longer continue to help the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light evolve into a true primordial origin spiritual treasure. The reason was very simple. Although these supreme emperors treated Luo Fan as the incarnation of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, they only treated him as an incarnation and didn't really treat him as the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. To them, the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was still the collection of countless worlds. In other words, compared to Luo Fan's orders, it was more important for them to protect the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, or rather, to protect the world inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. In this way, if Luo Fan's orders didn't threaten the world inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, such as when the power of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had yet to reach the limit that the world could withstand, Emperor Ming and the others would naturally carry out Luo Fan's orders without any hesitation. However, if Luo Fan's orders were to carry out, it would cause damage to the world inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. The outcome would be different. At that time, they would definitely fall out with each other. Perhaps they wouldn't directly attack Luo Fan, but they definitely wouldn't continue to help the wicked. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan directly used his control authority over the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to transfer them and the cultivation technique to the level 9 world when the level 4 world couldn't withstand it. The level 4 world couldn't withstand the power increase of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, but the level 9 world definitely wouldn't have a problem to a certain extent. A 9th level world could already be called a perfect world. Even a true saint would find it extremely difficult to destroy such a world, much less this tiny bit of inextinguishable sentient spirit light, evolving into a primordial essence spirit treasure. Sure enough, when they moved to the level 9 world, the strong impact only caused the world to tremble slightly. It made the great Tao of the world become slightly brighter. But it didn't cause any obvious damage to the world, let alone the existence of cracks or anything like that. It was also because of the transfer that Emperor Ming and the others, who were originally a little restless, finally stopped their actions and continued to attack the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, or rather, the mirror-like chaotic origin spiritual treasure, which had a clear outline. They wanted to reach into it and grab what was inside. The cultivation technique of Luo Fan's flesh and blood body. After coming to this world, this cultivation technique could no longer be continued, just like in the level 4 world. It constantly extracted the mysteries from it and integrated them into it to cultivate and sublimate itself. After all, the level of this world was much higher compared to this cultivation method. Even if there were any profound mysteries that leaked out, it would not be enough. Even if the mysteries that leaked out were at a level that was completely incomprehensible, if Luo Fan wanted to make the greatest improvement in this cultivation technique, he obviously wouldn't choose this world. But obviously, at this time, the most important thing for Luo Fan wasn't this, but the chaotic origin spiritual treasure, and so on and so forth. Another 3 years passed. After 3 years, the simulated innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that Emperor Ming and the others had condensed was no longer divided into a long river and a palm. All the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had been completely condensed into a palm and pressed on a mirror. This mirror was in the shape of a bronze mirror, and it looked extremely ordinary and simple. However, there was an indescribable, eternal, and indestructible quality emanating from it, vaguely distorting the surrounding space-time dimensions in a subtle way, causing the space-time dimensions around the mirror to show more and more independence in the process. This was obviously a quality that only the chaotic origin spiritual treasure had. For such a characteristic to appear on the mirror, it was self-evident what it meant. Seems like this is already the limit. At this moment, Luo Fan sighed helplessly. At this moment, the scene in front of him still looked so grand and vast. In fact, the level 9 world was already very different from before because of the collision between the two. Whether it was the brightness of the great Tao, the complexity of the nomological laws in the world, or the strengthening of the world that the fake sage of this world felt. It was a world of difference from before. However, this did not change the fact that the chaotic origin spiritual treasure that was forming on this side had already fallen into a stagnation and had not made any progress for a long time. And this change represented one thing. The power of the simulated innate, inextinguishable spiritual light could no longer stimulate the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan sighed. With a thought was transmitted to the hearts of Emperor Ming and the others in front of him. This thought contained an endless amount of information and principles. This information, this logic, was none other than what Luo Fan had comprehended from the natural, inextinguishable spirit light, the mysteries of a natural, inextinguishable spirit light. These countless mysteries were even more profound than the mysteries that Emperor Ming and the others had received from the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. They were closer to the origin of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Similarly, they also contained more of Luo Fan's imprints. If such mysteries were used to directly increase one's cultivation realm, it would naturally be destroying one's future. However, at this time, it was used to nurture the simulated innate, inextinguishable spiritual light of Emperor Ming and the others. This would allow their attacks to become more powerful and thus stimulate the potential of the chaotic origin spiritual treasure that was forming and allow it to form as much as possible. This was really convenient. As Luo Fan's thoughts surged in, Emperor Ming and the others showed various signs of understanding in their eyes. In the blink of an eye, the aura they exuded was subtly different from before. Vaguely, it was starting to move in the direction of Luo Fan. This was like the change that happened to Child Emperor in the world outside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. The reason why Child Emperor had such a change was because he was actively imitating Luo Fan and learning from Luo Fan. As for Emperor Ming and the others, they were passively enduring Luo Fan's will. They were passively influenced by this will and thus moved in the direction of Luo Fan, just as such a change was happening to their bodies. The power of the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that they had formed also started to gradually increase. It was already so powerful that it could shake time and space. The simulated, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that was faintly isolating the surrounding space-time dimension from the other space-time dimensions. As it grew stronger, the eternal and inextinguishable charm that it exuded became stronger and stronger. Even the space-time dimension that was originally only faintly showing signs of being isolated. It was gradually evolving in the direction of being completely isolated. As such a change occurred, the palm formed by the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light's impact on the mirror began to gradually increase. As the impact increased, the mirror seemed to be like pig iron that was being tempered, producing an indescribable vibration. In the midst of the vibration, the mirror began to change slightly in the direction of solidification. Seeing this scene, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Looks like it's a success, he thought. That mirror had already begun to possess the profoundness of a primordial spiritual treasure. At least at this moment, any pseudo-primordial spiritual treasure that he had encountered before was as inferior as sewage in a sewer compared to this mirror. Not to mention anything else. Just by carefully sensing the entire evolution process, Luo Fan already felt that his horizons had been broadened. He felt that he had gained many new insights into the way of true sage, his own worldview, and the various evolutions of primordial spiritual treasures. He faintly felt that a door that was getting wider and wider was being opened in front of him. Although this process didn't directly affect his cultivation realm, it was still the same as before. However, compared to the improvement of his cultivation method, it had a different kind of magical effect. It also moved him and made him feel happy. Just like that, another 3 years passed. On this day, The mirror that was enduring the constant impact of the palm, formed by the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, slightly trembled, and suddenly produced an indescribable power that swept over the simulated, inextinguishable spiritual light. As this power swept out, the simulated connate, inextinguishable spirit light instantly collapsed. All the worlds within it were completely destroyed, and all the spiritual light splashed in all directions, gradually fusing into the surrounding space-time, gradually becoming a part of this world, becoming nutrients for this world to improve. It's done. Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind in an instant. At this moment, he clearly felt that the mirror evolved from the inextinguishable spiritual light in front of him was no longer illusory at all. The entire mirror had completely turned into reality, becoming a real, complete primordial spiritual treasure. At this moment, this mirror began to emit some kind of indescribable light in front of him. An unprecedentedly strong, eternal, and inextinguishable aura was released from the mirror, quickly surging in all directions, and the surrounding space-time was wrapped in this aura. Luo Fan immediately immersed himself in this aura. Then, Emperor Ming and the others, then, it was the entire world of the 9th rank. In this incomparably mysterious aura, Luo Fan felt an indescribable feeling wrap around him. This feeling was as if he had never been so close to the path of true sage. He was very close to being truly eternal and inextinguishable and inextinguishable. There is only a small step left, and all that was left was a wish of his own. Is this the feeling of controlling a primordial spiritual treasure? Such a thought gradually surfaced in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, he slowly opened his eyes. At a glance, he discovered this entire, in a level 9 world, all living beings, including Emperor Ming and the others who were not far from Luo Fan, were shocked. One by one, they knelt down in front of the mirror and worshipped it. With a thought, Luo Fan already knew what was going on. The essence of this mirror was too high, so high that it surpassed the dreams of all living beings and the goals of all living beings. It appeared here. The essence of its existence naturally exerted an indescribable pressure on the life source of all living beings, causing them to have no choice but to offer their utmost respect. With a gentle wave of his hand, the mirror gradually shrunk and landed in his hand. As soon as the mirror touched his hand, an unimaginably heavy feeling came over him. In a trance, he felt as if he was holding billions of worlds. Under that heavy pressure, his body even made crackling sounds. It was as if his body could not withstand the weight of this mirror and was gradually collapsing under the pressure of this mirror. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan's heart moved, and he communicated with the brand contained in the mirror that belonged to him. As he communicated with the brand, he felt as if his flesh and blood were connected. In the blink of an eye, the heavy feeling on the mirror disappeared without a trace. When he held it in his hand, it felt as if there was nothing there. Following this change, the endless aura emanating from the mirror had already been completely withdrawn. This mirror directly changed from its previous supreme state to an ordinary and worn-out bronze mirror. As the aura of the mirror was restrained, all living beings naturally felt their bodies become lighter. Immediately after, he felt a sense of loss. It appeared in the hearts of all living beings. Everything that had happened previously, the aura emitted by this bronze mirror, the act of them kneeling down, was completely erased from their minds, as if it had never happened. Even Emperor Ming and the others were at a loss at this moment. They had completely forgotten everything that had happened after the mirror was completely formed. Looking at their behavior, Luo Fan had an inexplicable understanding in his heart. This is the true appearance of a primordial spirit treasure. Even if someone at a lower boundary knew of the mysteries of this primordial spirit treasure, they would still be unable to retain their memories. All memories related to its mysteries would naturally fade away. This is the true self-concealment of a divine object. He caressed the bronze mirror in his hand, feeling the supreme power hidden within it. Looking at its ordinary form, he seemed to understand something, but also seemed to understand nothing at the same time. We are not strong enough, so we cannot obtain this cultivation method. Please forgive us, fellow Taoist, Emperor Ming said to Luo Fan. The others also said similar words. This was obviously in response to Luo Fan's instructions a few years ago when he asked for their help. Hearing this, Luo Fan came back to his senses. He smiled and said, "Thank you for your help. It's fine now. Fellow Taoists, please do as you please." Hearing this, the Supreme Emperors nodded, lifted their feet, and took a step forward. Their figures directly left this level 9 world, disappearing in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. This level 9 world was not suitable for Luo Fan's cultivation, so it was naturally not suitable for them either. Perhaps they did not understand the division of levels in this world, but with the cultivation instincts of the Supreme Emperors, it was not a problem for them to discover this. In this level 9 world, after the mirror in Luo Fan's hand had completely returned to its normal state, the enhancement caused by the previous impact had gradually weakened. The great Tao of this world gradually returned to its original bleak state. The rules of the world also gradually began to return to their original simplicity. Countless false sages in this world also fell into a state where they could not sense the space to move forward in the direction of cultivation. However, this did not completely cut off their path of cultivation. Since the false sages in the level 4 world could understand early memory, how could they not? After Emperor Ming and the others left, Luo Fan did not stay here for too long. He raised his eyes and glanced at this world before turning around. With a light step, his figure had already stepped out of this world in the blink of an eye, directly arriving in the void between the countless worlds and the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. After arriving here, he looked outside and the power in his body surged. It began to brew. After a few days, when he felt that the power in his body had brewed to a power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than his original normal power, he let out a soft shout and turned this incomparably terrifying power into a pushing force, pushing his body out. He was heading out towards nothing else but the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. In the beginning, before he came into contact with the boundary between the connate inextinguishable spiritual light and the outside world, this process was extremely simple. His figure moved forward hundreds of millions of times faster than lightning. However, the moment he came into contact with the boundary, an existence that he had expected to appear appeared. A powerful resistance appeared in front of him, blocking his path forward. It made him feel that with every step he took, he had to expend a power that was tens or hundreds of times more than his original strength. Moreover, as he moved forward, this resistance was increasing crazily. He had only taken 3 small steps, and his body had only been able to break away from the innate, inextinguishable spirit light by a tiny bit. He felt that the resistance was so strong that even if he brewed for millions of years and condensed hundreds of millions of times his strength, he still wouldn't be able to break through. Bang! A circle of ripples appeared on the surface of the connate inextinguishable spiritual light and began to spread rapidly in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept across the entire connate inextinguishable spiritual light and kept reverberating on the surface of the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. It only disappeared after a while. At this moment, Luo Fan's body seemed to have been bounced back by a huge spring. He was bounced back from the barrier between the connate inextinguishable spiritual light and the outside world, crashing into the level 9 world at a speed hundreds of millions of times faster than lightning. Boom, boom, boom. The world shook violently. The great Tao of the entire world erupted with an incomparably shocking brightness at this moment. It did not look like a great Tao at all. Instead, it looked like a sun that was releasing endless light and heat. And at this moment, in the level 9 world, those false sages suddenly felt the feeling of being able to clearly feel the space before them and the direction of their cultivation return. However, the relaxed feeling that he had felt previously did not appear. Instead, it was replaced by a feeling of impending disaster. It was as if something extremely bad and had a huge negative impact on them was about to happen. At this moment, the entire world was shrouded in light. Under this light, everything in the world seemed to freeze. Be it false sages, ordinary cultivators, or ordinary elderly people, waterfalls, fallen leaves, or breezes, they were all completely frozen in this light. As they froze, cracks began to spread and gradually enveloped the entire world, causing the world to seem like it was about to shatter like a mirror. At this moment, an indescribable power was emitted. This power could not be described with words. After it appeared with a slight sweep, it had already healed all the cracks that filled the entire world. After the cracks were healed, the light slowly converged. Not long after, the thin face became the outline of a human holding a mirror in the center of this world. Then, the mirror trembled slightly. All the light converged, and the outline of the figure was revealed. Obviously, he was Luo Fan. Only Luo Fan could cause such a terrifying scene, almost destroying this level 9 world. Compared to before, he was now in a somewhat sorry state. His face was pale, and there was an inexplicable lingering fear in his eyes. The power around him was also slightly chaotic. If it wasn't for the mirror suppressing everything, he might have already been torn apart by the chaotic energy and turned into dust, disappearing without a trace. This doppelganger was almost finished. Luo Fan muttered. Chapter 1692. What he wanted to do before was nothing else but to take this primordial essence spirit treasure that he had spent a great deal of time and effort to evolve and bring it out of the inextinguishable natural light. He wanted to make it his own, a primordial essence spirit treasure that would allow him to truly be everlasting and indestructible, a primordial essence spirit treasure that couldn't be worn down by 10,000 tribulations. However, it was obvious that everything that had happened just now had told him that he was just a lunatic talking nonsense. This primordial spiritual treasure was indeed a real primordial spiritual treasure, and its power inside the connate, inextinguishable spirit light was not much different from a real primordial spiritual treasure. However, it was only formed from a tiny wisp of the innate spiritual light. A normal primordial spiritual treasure needed a complete connate, inextinguishable spirit light to evolve into a real primordial spiritual treasure. Moreover, this process would take billions of years to complete. This primordial spiritual treasure was evolved from a tiny wisp of connate, inextinguishable spirit light, and it only took a few years from the beginning to the end. Even with the stimulation of Emperor Ming and the others, the time was too short. No matter how he looked at it, it was different from a real, primordial spiritual treasure, right? Before this, Luo Fan had a vague guess about this difference. But it was only now that he was really sure of his guess. This primordial spiritual treasure was indeed a real, primordial spiritual treasure, but it could not leave the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Before this, he was still a little confused about the reason behind this. But when the final result came out, he felt that his thoughts were clear. It turned out that he had some doubts and some vague understanding. At this time, it had become incomparably clear, and this also made him understand that he, in fact, had not completely eliminated his wishful thinking. Why was there such a difference in understanding before and after? The reason was that before this, he still had a wishful thinking in his heart. His thoughts were not willing to admit the possibility that it was disadvantageous to him, and he instinctively did not want to think deeply about it, which led to this situation. The reason why this primordial spiritual treasure could not leave the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. The reason was very simple. It was a part of the complete, connate, inextinguishable spirit light. How could it change inside the connate, inextinguishable spirit light? No matter how it changed, it was just like a social change in a certain world inside the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. But if he wanted to take this primordial spiritual treasure out of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, the situation would be completely different. It was equivalent to cutting off a part of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and bringing it out. It was equivalent to destroying the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. However, to destroy this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, even in the state of chaos, how could Luo Fan do it? He even suspected that it would not be easy for a true sage to achieve this. Thinking about all of this, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly, secretly feeling embarrassed for his previous behavior. At the same time, he reflected on himself. In his heart, he warned himself to pay attention to that kind of fluke mentality. It was impossible for the primordial origin spirit treasure to leave the natural, inextinguishable spirit light. In fact, this fact was true even for mortals. As long as he thought about it a little more, he would be able to figure it out. However, he, as a supreme emperor who had already found the way to become a saint, had actually been deceived. How could he not think of this? Was this not worthy of his vigilance? There were all sorts of thoughts in his mind. Luo Fan's expression gradually changed inexplicably. The complacency that had been born from obtaining the primordial essence spirit treasure had already disappeared. Instead, it was replaced with a more steady and calm demeanor. Although I can't bring it out, it's still a primordial origin spirit treasure. Even if it can only be used in this world group, it's still a great gain. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan gradually dispersed the power that had accumulated in his body beyond what his body could withstand, allowing his body to return to its normal peak state. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a light stride. His figure had already left the level 9 world. This world had almost been shattered by the rebounding power, but under Luo Fan's control, the power of the entire inextinguishable spiritual light continued to gather in this world, quickly eliminating the damage that this world had suffered in an extremely mysterious manner, allowing this world to completely recover. Therefore, at this moment, this level 9 world was in an absolutely perfect state. There was no damage inside or outside. In fact, because of the terrifying impact from before, some of the potential of this world had been stimulated, causing this world to look more advanced than before. The great Tao in the dark had become much brighter. After leaving this world, Luo Fan's heart moved, and he arrived at a level 4 world. In the blink of an eye, he had already entered it. After entering this world, the mirror-like primordial origin spirit treasure shook slightly, and there was a faint, inexplicable pressure leaking out, causing the entire level 4 world to tremble subtly. Under this trembling, the potential of this world seemed to explode uncontrollably. The great Tao in the dark started to flicker with an inexplicable light, and the rules and laws of this world became more and more complicated during this process. At the same time, the false saints in this world all felt the sudden appearance of a huge space for improvement that they had not seen for a long time. The reason for this change was very simple. It was because the existence of this primordial origin spirit treasure had already surpassed the limit that this level 4 world could withstand. At this moment, just the existence of this primordial origin spirit treasure had already caused this world to begin to stimulate all the hidden potential due to the immense pressure. It could be imagined that if this continued, when the potential of this world was completely unleashed, it would be the time for this world to completely collapse. So that's how it is. Luo Fan looked at this scene with a vexed expression. Before this primordial origin spirit treasure had existed in the level 9 world. There, although this primordial origin spirit treasure had brought great pressure to that world in the beginning, it had restrained the power of this primordial origin spirit treasure. This kind of pressure naturally dissipated. However, he did not expect that in this level 4 world, even restraining the power of this primordial origin spirit treasure would not be able to completely eliminate the pressure it exerted on the outside world. Just the essence of its existence was already about to cause this world to collapse. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan could only sigh and take a step forward. He directly left this level 4 world. As he stepped out of the level 4 world with the primordial origin spirit treasure, that world quickly recovered. Whether it was the great Tao or the rules of that world, or everything else, everything was the same. In the blink of an eye, that level 4 world was already the same as before the primordial origin spirit treasure had entered. Originally, Luo Fan wanted to use this primordial essence spirit treasure to wrap his own flesh and blood body in his cultivation method. He wanted to let his body naturally extract endless mysteries from the level 4 world, evolve, and sublimate on its own. But now this world could not even support its existence, so it was obviously impossible to do this. All kinds of thoughts flashed in his mind. He played with the incomparably mysterious primordial origin spirit treasure that could even destroy a level 4 world in its existence form. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. In an instant, an inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Then, he casually waved the primordial origin spirit treasure in his hand. A phantom of a mirror. It gradually separated from the primordial origin spirit treasure like a mirror splitting. This mirror phantom seemed illusory and real, but it exuded an eternal and indestructible aura. Appearing in the void, it naturally formed an incomparably mysterious, illusory world, forming a circle of incomparably mysterious, specific space-time dimensions. This phantom was the projection of the primordial origin spirit treasure. The primordial origin spirit treasure, to a certain extent, it was already equivalent to a true sage. This kind of existence could create billions of projections. That was just ordinary. Now, he had only created one. What was the big deal? Although this projection was just a projection, it already contained a part of the characteristics of the primordial origin spirit treasure. Compared to any pseudo-primordial origin spirit treasure, it was countless times stronger. It could be said that just the projection alone was already invincible in the realm of true sage. In this projection, Luo Fan's fleshly body was quietly curled up. It looked like a ball of strange thread made of unknown material. After the projection of the primordial origin spirit treasure appeared, it shook slightly, and all the light and aura were completely restrained. As its aura was restrained, the world phantom that had originally formed because of the projection naturally disappeared, allowing the void around Luo Fan to return to its original appearance. Then, the mirror phantom slightly shook, rushed forward, and directly rushed into the 4th level world. As it rushed in, the 4th level world shook slightly. The great way began to shine, and the rules and principles began to rapidly evolve in a complicated direction. It was not much different from when the main body of the primordial origin spirit treasure had entered. However, this was only the beginning. Soon, the changes stopped. The 4th level world thus maintained a state where part of its potential had been stimulated and stopped changing. Sure enough, although there is pressure, it is not as great as when I used the main body of the primordial origin spirit treasure. It is still within the range that the 4th level world can bear. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, he had an idea and summoned Emperor Ming and the others. Previously, he had planned to use the primordial origin spirit treasure to protect the cultivation method of the flesh and blood body. However, the power of the primordial origin spirit treasure was too strong, and the world could not bear it. Naturally, this plan could not be carried out, and this resulted in a result. That was, all his previous plans and experiments were in vain. Now that he had used the projection of the primordial origin spirit treasure to protect the cultivation method of his flesh and blood body, he naturally had to experiment again. There was nothing much to be said about this experiment. It was nothing more than the previous process, the final result of the experiment. But it made Luo Fan heave a sigh of relief. Even if Emperor Ming and the others attacked with all their strength, they would not be able to exceed the limit of the 4th level world and destroy it. The projection of the primordial origin spirit treasure did not move at all, and was not affected by their attacks. No matter how the attacks poured on it, there was no change. It felt like he was holding a noodle against a long sword. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan was relieved. He waved his hand and sent Emperor Ming and the others back. After that, he no longer cared about what would happen inside the 4th level world. He turned around and left the 4th level world. He came directly to the door that was surrounded by countless lights and shadows, the door that led to the state of chaos. This door that led directly to the state of chaos was no different from before. He could still touch the state of chaos with a stretch of his hand. But, compared to before, the situation was very different. Previously, Luo Fan could clearly feel the terrifying danger it contained. That kind of feeling, as long as he reached out and touched the state of chaos, the power of the state of chaos would suddenly erupt and completely erase his body, and even all traces of his existence would disappear completely. But now, this feeling of danger had completely disappeared. What replaced it was a kind of confidence, a confidence that he would be fine even if he touched the state of chaos. This kind of confidence, it was not without a reason, but it came from the primordial origin spirit treasure that looked like a bronze mirror in his hand. Is this my illusion, or is it real? This thought suddenly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought in mind, his heart moved, and he slowly reached out towards the state of chaos. As his palms stretched forward, the bronze mirror in his hand began to tremble slightly. An inexplicable power was produced from the bronze mirror and poured into his body, causing his entire body to gradually transform into an incomparably mysterious state. This mysterious state, at first glance, there was no difference from the normal situation. But as long as he carefully sensed it, he would discover this state was actually a state of fusion. In this state, the relationship between his body and the bronze mirror in his hand seemed to become closer and more intimate. In the end, the instant before his palm touched the state of chaos, the bronze mirror seemed to have completely fused with his body. Although Luo Fan had already reached out to touch the state of chaos when he sensed that incomparably safe feeling, the truth was that he was constantly sensing the state of his body during this process and was constantly prepared to withdraw his hand and stop his plan. Therefore, he was able to clearly sense the indescribable fusion between his body and the copper mirror during this entire process. Moreover, he was also able to clearly grasp all the changes that were occurring during this process. At this point, he finally understood why he felt so safe. Finally, he no longer had any scruples and forcefully thrust forward, wanting to directly insert his hand into the state of chaos. However, at this moment, an incomparably gentle force suddenly appeared in front of his palm. It blocked the path of his palm. What's going on? Luo Fan frowned. He tried again and raised his hand to press down again, only to find that his palm was still blocked by that gentle force. Moreover, no matter how much strength he used, the force that was blocking his hand didn't lose the slightest bit, nor did it show any signs of breaking through. It was as if there was an invisible barrier between him and the state of chaos. After a few attempts, Luo Fan sighed and could only stop. After thinking about it for a while, he understood what was going on. Now, this primordial origin spiritual treasure had in fact formed a 1-2 relationship with him. Under this kind of relationship, when his palm entered the state of chaos, it was equivalent to the primordial origin spiritual treasure also entering the state of chaos. And from another perspective, didn't this mean that the primordial origin spiritual treasure had left the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light? And through previous deductions, it was already determined that it was impossible for the primordial origin spiritual treasure to leave the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Understanding this, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. He knew that he had made the same mistake as before. After reflecting on himself again, he moved his palm away from the state of chaos. As his palm moved away from the state of chaos, the state of fusing with the primordial essence spirit treasure naturally separated itself from it. Shaking his head slightly and sighing, Luo Fan took a light step forward and left the door leading to the state of chaos. Although he still needed to comprehend the state of chaos here to improve his cultivation and perfect his worldview. However, compared to this, he had a more important thing to do. That was to take away this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Let this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light go to where his body was, so that this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light would no longer be in a state of ownerlessness. Instead, it would truly be marked with his name. This was like finding a gold mine in the wild. If it was placed there, everyone would think that it was ownerless. Even if someone's name was written on it, no one would think that it belonged to that person because of that name. But if he took this gold mine back and placed it in someone's house, even if his name was not on it, no one would think that the gold mine was not his, and now, this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was the gold mine. Although Luo Fan had not truly refined this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, as long as he could transfer it to where his body was and control it, then no one would be able to deny that this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was his. The acknowledgement of others would not have any effect on Luo Fan's mastery of this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. However, the acknowledgement of others, it could avoid trouble, lest he had to face many supreme emperors appearing inside and outside the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light every once in a while, trying to refine it. At this time, Luo Fan was suspended in the void between the many worlds. He did not leave this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Instead, with a thought, this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light shook slightly and began to move slowly. Luo Fan mastered this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. He relied on the resonance between his flesh and blood body and this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and nothing else. Therefore, if he wanted to move this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he naturally only needed this resonance. Naturally, he did not need to leave this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. This was different from taking something and leaving the place, where the gate of chaos was. The structure of time and space was extremely mysterious, and the connection between it and the outside world was even faintly discernible. This could be seen from the fact that the connection between all supreme emperors and that unknown place had been cut off. Therefore, it was not as easy to move anything here as it was in the outside world. There was no way to easily shift time and space, and one could only move forward by flying. This connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was the same. This was even more so when Luo Fan's control of this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light had not reached the level where he could truly control it as he pleased. This went on for a full 10 years. This connate, inextinguishable spiritual light finally arrived at the edge of the gate of chaos. Only then could he finally sense that indescribable existence that could be sensed anywhere in the world. I'm finally here. At this moment, within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, Luo Fan let out a long sigh of relief. If he was doing other things, 10 years was of course nothing to him. Not to mention making him feel tired, he probably wouldn't even be able to attract much attention. However, don't forget that what he was doing in these 10 years was indirectly controlling this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. This kind of manipulation required him to perform some kind of extremely subtle and complicated control over his own body. It also required him to fully activate his potential and concentrate on all of this. This point could actually be imagined from the fact that he shrunk the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light into the ring that revolved around his body back then. Therefore, during this process, Luo Fan was under great pressure, both physically and mentally. In the end, these 10 years felt as long as hundreds of millions of years to him. With this kind of background, now that he had finally arrived at the edge of the gate of chaos, and finally sensed that unknown place, he could finally use the method of shifting time and space to directly transfer this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to where his main body was. He no longer needed to fly as painstakingly as before. How could he not relax? Just as Luo Fan let out a sigh of relief and was about to shift time and space to transfer this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to where his main body was, the surrounding time and space distorted. Chapter 1693. This hand was so huge that it even flickered with an eternal and indestructible light. This allowed the hand to remain unaffected even in the dusky, primal chaos gate. The grayish existence in the surroundings was like air to him. It constantly attacked the palm, but it couldn't even cause the slightest ripple on the palm. That palm stretched straight towards the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Judging from the looks of it, clearly He wanted to take the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light for himself. Ooh! Luo Fan's heart trembled. His figure flashed, and he suddenly appeared outside of the innate spiritual light. With a gentle wave of his hand, countless spiritual lights emerged from his body, condensing into an imitation of the innate spiritual light. It directly turned into a palm and brazenly welcomed the incoming palm. At this moment, the primordial origin spirit treasure that had just been born was naturally not in his hands. Instead, it was inside the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Cent pound top, cent pound points, cent pound little cent pound say. Therefore, at this time, it was certainly impossible for Luo Fan to use this primordial essence spirit treasure to fight the enemy. He could only fight like he normally did, using his spiritual light to simulate all sorts of things to fight the enemy. His imitation of the innate spirit light was much more similar to the imitation of the innate spirit light that the others had shown before. After it appeared, it naturally possessed a kind of eternal indestructibility. An indomitable charm was revealed. This palm that was formed from the innate, inextinguishable spirit light seemed to contain its own unique space-time dimension. Although it was launched later, it slapped onto the approaching palm first. Before the palm could activate its power to its limit, the power of Luo Fan's palm had already been triggered. An earth-shattering quake was produced. At this moment, an incomparably pitch-black cloud appeared out of thin air. Inside the cloud, moreover, he could faintly sense the existence of an inconceivable destructive power. However, the cloud disappeared just as quickly as it appeared. A shock wave that seemed to engulf the entire world was emitted from the point of contact between the two palms, directly sweeping through the cloud. Before the cloud's power could erupt, it was directly dispersed by the shock wave. All the power contained within was instantly crushed, and the shock wave spread out in all directions. At this moment, the palm that Luo Fan had condensed, which simulated the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, suddenly collapsed. All the tiny fragments flew in all directions, as if a huge firework had appeared out of nowhere. Compared to the palm formed by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, the palm that had appeared out of nowhere performed much better. Although it had shattered into countless pieces, it did not completely explode. Instead, it looked as if the countless pores on the palm were spitting out sparks. The result of such a collision was obvious. Luo Fan had fallen into a disadvantageous position. Moreover, it was a huge disadvantage. The palm that had obtained the upper hand and defeated Luo Fan's counterattack passed through the powerful shockwave produced by the collision without hesitation and slapped towards Luo Fan. The opponent's target was obviously the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. However, since Luo Fan was here, it clearly meant that if he wanted to obtain the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he could only appear and subdue Luo Fan. The light on it is the true, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. At this moment, Luo Fan already knew what he was facing. His imitation of the innate spirit light resonated with the innate spirit light. He could feel the essence of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light at all times. So he had almost reached the limit of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Under such circumstances, obviously, only something related to the true, innate, inextinguishable spiritual light could defeat the simulated innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Coupled with the eternal and inextinguishable light that appeared on the palm at this moment, how could he not know that it was the light of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light? To be able to use the light of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light so easily, to be able to add it to his own attack, the one who launched the attack should at least be a grade 3 emperor. In other words, an emperor with the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Although he didn't know why a grade 3 emperor with the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light would attack him, Luo Fan obviously didn't want to sit still and wait for death. At this moment, after figuring out what kind of existence his opponent was, his heart stirred. He raised his hand, and a V-shaped fragment appeared in his hand. After this fragment appeared, It shook slightly and disappeared without a trace. Then, in front of the palm that stretched over, there were hundreds of millions of fragments. Among these hundreds of millions of fragments, every one of them was no different from a real fragment. They also had their own independent space-time dimension. The pressure it exerted on all existences in the outside world was equally terrifying. Even if there was only one such fragment, it was enough to make the palm exhausted. At this time, when hundreds of millions of fragments suddenly appeared at the same time, how could the palm withstand it? A muffled groan came from a void. Then, the palm collapsed under the attack of the hundreds of millions of fragments, turning into countless tiny fragments that splashed in all directions. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, it had turned into a huge firework. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan just casually withdrew his hand, and the hundreds of millions of fragments suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, they directly reappeared in his hand, worthy of being a fragment of the primordial origin spiritual treasure. An inexplicable satisfaction arose in Luo Fan's heart. After this satisfaction, there was a kind of indescribable unwillingness that emerged, washing away the satisfaction. This kind of unwillingness was because he suddenly thought of the complete primordial origin spiritual treasure that existed in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Even the power of this fragment of the primordial origin spiritual treasure was already terrifying to this extent. How terrifying would the power of a complete primordial origin spiritual treasure be? However, a treasure with such terrifying might was actually restrained within the innate eternal spirit light in the end, and it was utterly impossible to take it out. It was even to the extent that it couldn't even reveal a trace of its might. How could he be willing to accept this? Just as Luo Fan was feeling unwilling, a figure gradually condensed in the distance. It was the figure of a young man. This man was different from all the supreme emperors he had seen before. There was not a single part of his body that looked ordinary. As he stood there, he exuded an intimidating aura from head to toe. His eyes were filled with a terrifying aura. In those eyes, there was a kind of supreme divine light that overlooked all living beings and all existences. Being looked at by that gaze, there was a feeling that he had suddenly become incomparably small, while the other party had suddenly become incomparably tall. Facing such a gaze, Luo Fan snorted coldly. "How should I address you, fellow cultivator? Why did you attack me?" I just wanted to see if fellow cultivator had really refined this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the man said indifferently. As he spoke, he had no intention of introducing himself at all. As for Luo Fan asking for his name, he pretended not to hear it. Seeing this attitude, how could Luo Fan not understand what it meant? It was clearly indicating that he was not qualified to know the man's name. "So, how do you feel now, fellow cultivator?" Luo Fan said indifferently. "I still cannot confirm whether fellow cultivator has refined this innate, inextinguishable spiritual light or not." The man's expression became even colder. As he spoke, the high and mighty temperament on his body became even more intense and obvious. Following that, there was an inexplicable light that belonged to the inextinguishable spiritual light emitted from his body. This light was so obvious. It was so dense and so much of it. Under this light, this person did not look like a supreme emperor. Instead, he looked like the materialization of an inextinguishable spiritual light. It really is a level 3 emperor. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat and his expression darkened. This supreme emperor raised his hand and opened it. Endless light gathered in his palm. In the blink of an eye, it had already turned into a pagoda. This pagoda had 33 levels. As the treasure light shot into the sky, the surrounding heaven and earth began to tremble violently. In fact, a cluster of pitch-black clouds in the sky started to gather again. However, unfortunately, just like before, the cloud disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Almost in the blink of an eye, the moment the treasure light sensed the cloud's appearance, it suddenly charged at the cloud, causing it to collapse. In the blink of an eye, it turned into countless tiny fragments and disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Luo Fan's expression darkened. He knew what that cloud was at a glance. It was clearly the world sensing that an existence that could pose a threat to it had appeared in this world. Thus, it naturally condensed the tribulations and gathered its power to eliminate this existence. This kind of tribulations was originally aimed at this object. Its power was not something that this object could resist. However, at this moment, right in front of Luo Fan, the pagoda had completely dispersed the tribulations that were aimed at it with just a ray of treasure light. This kind of straightforwardness was really hard to believe. It seems that this is either a projection of the inextinguishable spiritual light or a fragment of a chaotic origin spiritual treasure. Luo Fan thought to himself. With this thought in mind, he did not hesitate to raise the V-shaped fragment of the chaotic origin spiritual treasure in his hand. Intense light emitted from the fragment. Immediately after, the fragment flickered and disappeared without a trace. At this moment, trillions of these fragments appeared out of thin air around the man's body, and they brazenly crushed towards the man. These trillions of fragments stacked together like a circular wall, completely covering the man's figure. No light that was originally emitted from the man's body could penetrate through. At this moment, the infinite light emitted by the 33-story pagoda was like countless sharp blades that brazenly pierced through the countless fragments, causing them to disappear one by one. Finally, there was only one fragment left. In a flash, it appeared in front of Luo Fan. When the fragment entered his hand, an incomparably hot feeling came from it. Even though Luo Fan was a supreme emperor, facing such a hot feeling, he still almost let go and threw the fragment to the side. So strong. As this thought flashed in his mind, Luo Fan cast his gaze towards where the man was. At this moment, the man's figure looked the same as before, but the treasure light of the 33-story pagoda seemed to have dimmed a little. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. The treasure light of the pagoda was actually affected. Didn't this mean that his attack, just now, was not so easy for the pagoda? At least, it wasn't as easy as it seemed. I originally only wanted you to give up on this connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Now it seems that you have no choice but to give up on this true sage treasure fragment. The man looked at Luo Fan as if nothing had happened and said so. As he spoke, he suddenly raised his hand, and the 33-story pagoda in his hand soared into the sky. It expanded crazily in the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it had become tens of thousands of feet high and brazenly shrouded Luo Fan. This pagoda was so huge. Under its shroud, an endless amount of pressure surged out from Yi Zichen's mind. The pressure was so frightening that even the space and time of the primal chaos gate that was contaminated by the primal chaos began to undergo unimaginable changes under the pressure. The grayish existence was rapidly annihilated and turned into all sorts of unimaginable light and shadows, displaying all sorts of indescribable chaos at the same time. Luo Fan could clearly feel a kind of power that could easily crush him, surging towards him from all directions. The strong pressure made, whether it was his flesh and blood body or the spiritual light avatar inside, it made ka-ka-ka-ka-ka sounds. It was as if the countless details inside were constantly breaking and shattering. Facing this situation, Luo Fan's expression became fierce. He shouted loudly. Endless spiritual light gushed out from his body and poured into the V-shaped primordial origin spiritual treasure fragment in his hand, directly making the primordial origin spiritual treasure fragment suddenly emit endless light. The source of this light was the spiritual light condensed by Luo Fan. But after the transformation of his fragment, its nature had already increased by who knows how many times after the nature of this light had increased. Although its power had increased by who knows how many times, it still had a weakness. That was Luo Fan had already lost control of this light. The power of the spiritual light condensed by Luo Fan had already increased to the limit of his control. Even when he condensed it into the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it only changed its shape and its macroscopic structure. It was the same as building a house with a block of wood. Although its use seemed to be worlds apart, its essence hadn't changed much. In this case, the result of the increase in the quality of the spiritual light was that it naturally broke through the limit of his control. At this moment, Luo Fan lost control of the light. He could only let the light sense danger and automatically lock onto the 33-story pagoda that was pressing down on them. The light condensed into a six-fingered palm that brazenly reached up and directly collided with the pagoda. Silently, the grayish existence in the surroundings that had already gone through a round of destruction completely collapsed and was destroyed. Even the nothingness behind it had completely collapsed, revealing a strange, dusky state. Chaotic state. Then, the six-fingered palm that was condensed from the light trembled slightly. It seemed to have executed a technique that even left Luo Fan dumbfounded. Its power suddenly soared by who knows how many times. With a slight grab, the 33-story pagoda collapsed under its power. Countless fragments flew in all directions. At this moment, the face of the man who hadn't said his name suddenly changed. He opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. Then, the light on his body seemed to be dyed with blood, and it began to quickly turn blood red. On his face, there was a look of disbelief. How was this possible? He only had time to say these words before the six-fingered palm swiped over and wiped away all traces of his existence. This was the connection between the six-fingered palm and the man. It naturally locked onto the man behind the pagoda and attacked him in a way that almost transcended the dimensions of space and time. The ability of the palm to wipe away the pagoda in an instant had obviously exceeded the limits of what the man could withstand. Naturally, he was completely wiped away by the palm. After the six-fingered palm wiped away the man, it swept around and flattened the surrounding space and time. It was like a layer of sand being wiped away, revealing the existence behind space and time. The dusky, chaotic state that could destroy all life if it came into contact with a single speck of it. At this moment, an incomparably pitch-black cloud condensed in the void. This cloud was even denser than the cloud that the man had condensed when he had condensed the pagoda. Its range was also much larger. After it appeared, it began to surge violently, and traces of lightning began to emerge from the cloud. At this moment, earth-shattering thunderclaps resounded, causing the surrounding space to tremble as though it had turned into a stormy sea. At this time, Luo Fan saw everything, but he could only watch. At this time, he was no longer pouring spirit light into the fragment to stimulate its power. Instead, the fragment had grabbed his body and frantically extracted spirit light from his body to exert its own power. Under such circumstances, unless Luo Fan's body collapsed, he simply couldn't stop the fragment from using his spirit light to do anything at this moment. The six-fingered palm turned slightly and stretched straight toward the pitch-black cloud in the void. At this moment, the pitch-black cloud suddenly released an endless amount of lightning that struck down at the palm. These bolts of lightning did not fall from the sky like pillars like in the past. Instead, after they left the cloud, the lightning bolts fell from the sky. Instead, after they left the cloud, they directly turned and condensed into a long sword. A ray of light looked like a sword. It was a mysterious long sword that made people feel like they were being split apart. Around this long sword, there were countless strange lights shining faintly. There was also an indescribable smell of blood spreading from this long sword, causing the surrounding heaven and earth to be immersed in this bloody stench. After this long sword appeared, it stabbed straight at the six-fingered palm. During the process, space and time, it was as if it was made of paper that was easily cut open. The six-fingered palm trembled slightly in the void when it was stimulated, and it naturally made an extremely subtle and mysterious response. This response was so unfathomable. Even Luo Fan couldn't see the profoundness behind it. At that time, He had watched it very seriously and had clearly incorporated all the changes into his own life source and into the depths of his memory. However, when he turned his eyes away, he found that he had completely forgotten all the details of the changes in the palm. He only knew that the palm had made some indescribable changes. This is the means of a true divine. At this moment, Luo Fan understood. As he came to this realization, he realized exactly what was going on with that palm. This palm must have been the palm of the true divine who had refined the primordial origin spiritual treasure that had been broken into countless pieces. Of course, at most, it was only the image of the palm or the trace left by the palm. There couldn't be more. After understanding this, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. The palm had 6 fingers, but this was definitely not the appearance that a connate Taoism body in the Earth universe or this strange perfect world should have. In other words, this primordial origin spiritual treasure fragment definitely didn't come from any of the 7 true divine in the Earth universe. It could only come from another perfect world, or even another great world. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a chill. From another perfect world, did the true divine fight with someone in the state of chaos, and his primordial origin spiritual treasure was broken, and your fragment randomly drifted here, or did the true divine set his eyes on the Earth universe, and in the battle of invasion and resistance, the primordial origin spiritual treasure was broken, and its fragment came here? If it was the first situation, then it was fine, and it had nothing to do with him. But if it was the second situation, then the situation could not be any worse. Chapter 1694. Under the mysterious transformation, the 6-fingered palm easily caught the strange, lightning longsword in its hand. With a slight tremble, the electric longsword collapsed with a loud bang. In the blink of an eye, it completely turned into nothingness, as if it had never appeared before. It disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky reacted again. It was unknown how many phantoms appeared in the tribulation clouds. These phantoms were extremely mysterious. They looked like magical treasures that trembled and flickered in the tribulation clouds. They emitted all kinds of unimaginable light and produced all kinds of unimaginable pressure. Luo Fan looked over and instantly understood what was going on with these phantoms. They were the projections of the pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasure that had once appeared in this world. The reason why he knew this was because he saw an extremely familiar figure among the many phantoms. It was a 3-legged cauldron. In other words, it was the divine court heavenly cauldron that Luo Fan had successfully refined. Ever since the divine court heavenly cauldron was successfully refined, Luo Fan had rarely used it. This was because his strength had already reached an unimaginable level. Although the divine court heavenly cauldron was powerful, it was nothing to him. He could easily surpass the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron. However, the divine court heavenly cauldron had already appeared in this world. Its traces and marks had long been deeply engraved in the depths of this world. In this way, he could naturally summon the projection of the tribulation clouds and have it appear in the depths of the tribulation clouds to attack the palm that Luo Fan had formed with the help of the V-shaped fragment. In the face of such a change, the 6-fingered palm trembled slightly. A handprint that Luo Fan had never seen before formed in the void, but just by looking at it, he could tell that it contained the endless mysteries of a true saint. The changes of the handprint were so complicated that it had even exceeded the limits of what Luo Fan could bear. He felt dizzy just looking at it, not to mention trying to create it. Moreover, it was stopping him from creating the handprint. There was also an even more important factor. That was this handprint was formed by 6 fingers. Naturally, these 6 fingers were not like those of an ordinary person with a deformed palm. One of the 6 fingers could not be moved at all, and even if it could be moved, it would be extremely stiff. Every single one of those 6 fingers was extremely nimble. Furthermore, every single one of those fingers cooperated closely with each other as they attacked. It was extremely exquisite. It could be said that if any of the fingers were missing, then not only would the might of the attack be greatly reduced, it might even cause a backlash in the end and injure the palm instead. This was clearly not just because the owner of the palm was extremely intelligent and was able to think of countless exquisite methods to use the sixth finger. It was definitely an extremely grand object. It could only be achieved with the support of the vast, six-fingered civilization. Only after countless years of development and the wisdom of countless living beings had they been enlightened. Only by organizing and creating could such an exquisite method of using the six fingers be formed. If any of the conditions were not met, the method of using the six fingers would definitely be different. After the six-fingered palm made the hand seal, the heavenly Dragon King's body trembled. The surrounding world underwent an incomparably shocking change. In a trance, even the rules and laws seemed to undergo some indescribable change. Even the endless fragments of the great Tao and the mysteries of true sages in the surroundings seemed to be organized and gathered by some kind of inconceivable and terrifying power at this moment. They condensed into an extremely incredible structure, forming a strange space-time that surrounded the handprint. Or rather, a strange space-time dimension. Immediately after, the space-time dimension and the space-time dimension were sent up along the palm and into the tribulation cloud above the void. With an earth-shattering rumble, the projections of the countless pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures that had just been summoned in the tribulation cloud were completely shattered. The terrifying impact instantly tore apart the tribulation cloud, causing it to turn into countless fragments in the blink of an eye and quickly dissipate into nothingness. When the tribulation cloud disappeared, the surrounding world seemed to have completely changed. Even the indescribable existence that had originally enveloped the entire world seemed to have disappeared at this moment. At the very least, within this range, it was no longer possible to sense that indescribable existence. In fact, it wasn't just that indescribable existence that had disappeared. Even the realm source that Luo Fan had always sensed in his heart seemed to have been covered in a layer of fog at this moment. It became faintly discernible, illusory, and real at the same time. Wanting to send his mind into the realm source once again became a fool's dream. At this moment, the six-fingered palm was still unwilling to give up. It began to change its hand seals, and hand seals that surpassed the limits of his understanding appeared one after another. And during this process, Luo Fan also felt an incomparably astonishing, attractive force being produced from the V-shaped fragment. It was frantically acting on his body, extracting the endless spiritual light and power within his body, turning it into power for the six-fingered palm. This allowed the six-fingered palm to change its hand seals as it pleased. A feeling of exhaustion gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. Everything seemed to have been extracted during this process, and he faintly felt that his entire body was about to collapse. This can't go on. If this goes on, my spirit-like clone will be destroyed. And if the spirit-like clone is destroyed, this body of flesh and blood will also collapse. When that happens, won't this connate, inextinguishable spirit light leave me? At this moment, this thought directly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. A feeling of anxiety gradually emerged. The fragment clearly didn't care about what Luo Fan thought. It only instinctively followed the traces left on his body by the true saint and continuously extracted all the energy that could be extracted to execute the technique. It completely didn't care whether Luo Fan could bear it or not. Luo Fan was extremely anxious, and he tried his best to think of what to do. Giving up this spirit-like clone was equivalent to giving up the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Obviously, Luo Fan wouldn't agree to it in the end. After pondering for a long time, the six-fingered palm had already changed hundreds of hand seals. In the end, when the surrounding space-time dimension had almost become an extremely vast, almost perfect world, he had a flash of inspiration and finally came up with a solution. With this thought in mind, without hesitation, he turned his body and directly drilled into the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. If he didn't resonate with the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, his drilling would definitely not have any effect. After all, The primordial spiritual treasure fragment could only frantically extract his power and his spirit light. There was clearly an inexplicable power that was imprisoning him in place. Unless he was in peak condition, he wouldn't be able to move at all. However, he had a resonance with the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. This allowed him to control the power of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Although he couldn't use it to fight enemies outside of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, it was completely no problem for him to suck himself in. Therefore, at this moment, when he drilled into the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, his body produced a thunderous explosion. Amidst the explosion, endless and terrifying shock waves erupted from his body. They swept in all directions, directly flattening the area within the chaos gate that was already enveloped by the inexplicable space-time dimension. This caused this place to completely turn into a chaotic scene. This scene even made people wonder if Luo Fan had already self-destructed. At this moment, Luo Fan's body trembled, and he disappeared on the spot. He directly entered the connate, inextinguishable spirit light and disappeared without a trace, just as Luo Fan entered the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. An indescribable, isolating power appeared on his body. The V-shaped fragment swayed and suddenly stopped extracting the spirit light and power from Luo Fan's body. He felt his body relax, and there was a long-lost comfort that surged up. At the same time, outside the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, the six-fingered palm had lost its source of power. Although its power still existed, it couldn't continue to execute the hand seal that it had originally prepared. At this moment, the terrifying power contained in the hand seal instantly caused a backlash. At this moment, the entire world felt an earth-shattering tremor. An extremely shocking light swept across the entire world at this moment, causing all living creatures in this world, from the supreme emperors to the ordinary creatures without intelligence, to feel that the entire world had lit up at this moment. They even vaguely felt an indescribable impact from the inside out. It kept impacting their bodies, impacting their souls, impacting their everything, causing them to faintly undergo an indescribable change. This change was the most fundamental change to the world. It caused the endless great path fragments and the mysteries of the true saints to inexplicably condense. Countless great path fragments unknowingly condensed into an indescribable great path, like a silk net that covered the entire world. This was the result of the hand seal not being completed. One could imagine what kind of incredible changes would happen to the entire world once the hand seal was completed. The world was filled with endless anger at this moment. In an instant, the entire world began to tremble violently. This kind of trembling was not caused by the hand seal of the six-fingered palm. Instead, the world was actively trembling. In this trembling, all the great path fragments, all the mysteries of the true saints, and all the rules and laws in the entire world began to tremble violently. It also produced all sorts of incredible changes. From the originally quiet and peaceful state, it became an explosive state. It began to crazily impact the threads of the Great Path that had just been formed because of the hand seal, causing the threads of the Great Path to continuously break and collapse. After a long time, all the Great Path fragments were completely crushed and turned back into Great Path fragments, allowing the world to completely return to its original state. In the process of the world transformation, all the living creatures in this world felt as if a great disaster was about to befall them. In a trance, he felt that the entire world seemed to have come to life at this moment, as if it had become an unimaginable existence. It started to want to completely erase everything in this world, as if it wanted to kill all the living beings in this world at this moment. All the living creatures were trembling in fear. Some even directly prostrated themselves in worship, begging the world to let them go. And at this moment, the source of all the changes, which was the six-fingered palm, had already been devoured by the power of the hand seal. It collapsed with a loud bang, directly destroying the strange space-time dimension that was formed by the hand seal. It even directly wiped out that position. All the great path fragments and the mysteries of the true saints had completely disappeared, revealing a rare void. There was no mysteries or power at all. Such a change. It was naturally within Luo Fan's senses. Even though he had already entered the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it was impossible for him to completely give up control of the world outside. How could he not understand this change that even involved the change of the entire world's rules? It almost completely changed the entire world. A true saint is indeed a true saint. Even if it only leaves a small trace, it can still change the world. Luo Fan sighed. He could even imagine that if he had really allowed the hand seal to be used just now, the entire world would definitely have turned into a completely different appearance. All the living creatures in this world would either be completely destroyed because they could not adapt to the new world, or they would completely adapt to the new world and completely turn into a different race. And after that, the most likely thing that would happen was that the unknown true saint's trace in the fragment might leave and eventually enter somewhere in this world to reincarnate and be reborn. And after that, the most likely thing that would happen was that the unknown true saint's trace in the fragment might leave and eventually enter somewhere in this world to be reincarnated and reborn. In the future, it might even break through the gap between the real and the fake, turn the fake into the real, and become a true saint. Thinking of this, even with Luo Fan's will, he could not help but shiver. If it really came to that, not to mention whether he could continue to cultivate in this world, even his life might be easily erased. The more one understood the existence of a true saint, the more one felt that it was incredible, and the clearer one understood how supreme it was. Back then, when Luo Fan had just created the cultivation method in the primordial world, he even dared to directly create the Tao fruit Great Tao that led to the true saint realm. Even though the creation process was actually created with the help of Pangu's primordial spirit, it was still based on his own will, which showed how big his heart was. However, as time passed and his cultivation realm continued to increase, when he reached the Khanate Zenith Heaven realm, he realized that there was actually a quasi-saint level above the Khanate Zenith Heaven realm and before the primordial chaos Tao fruit that was recorded in his Tao fruit Great Tao. Only by passing the extremely huge quasi-saint level could he obtain the primordial chaos Tao fruit and step into the true saint level. After that, when he cultivated to the peak of the quasi-saint level, he realized that there was still an unreachable distance from the true saint. He still needed to cross the 9th level of the pseudo-saint level to be possible. Just like that, the more he improved, the more he felt the vastness of the true saint, and the more he realized how far he was from the true saint. Until now, when he had truly reached the supreme emperor level and was tens of thousands of times more powerful than ordinary pseudo-saints, he still couldn't clearly understand how powerful a true saint was. In this way, if a true saint appeared in this world, what kind of situation would he fall into? Luo Fan almost didn't dare to think about it. A true saint is indeed a true saint. In the end, he ended the process of the change in his thinking with this repeated sigh. After all, what appeared was only a trace of a true saint's technique. Although the impact was extremely shocking, it was still within the range that this world could bear. After a few days, the world had completely erased all the changes caused by the six-fingered palm, causing the world to return to its original appearance. Not only the great Tao fragments, but the area that the six-fingered palm had destroyed had also been completely restored. The absolute nothingness that had existed for a few days had been completely replaced by the state of endless great Tao fragments and endless mysteries of the true saint in the normal world. If it wasn't for the fact that the scene from that time still remained in his memory, perhaps Luo Fan would have doubted whether such a drastic change had really happened back then. After a few days of recovery, Luo Fan's spiritual light clone and body had also recovered. After all, his life source hadn't been damaged much, so the spiritual light and power that had been consumed could naturally be continuously created by him out of thin air. In this way, it wasn't difficult to make up for the consumption of the spiritual light clone. A few days, it was already enough. As for his body of flesh and blood, it was even simpler. The path that this body of flesh and blood took was completely in accordance with the internal cultivation path of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. In this way, it would naturally be able to receive endless replenishment in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Even if the entire body collapsed and was destroyed, it could recover in the blink of an eye, and it would recover to its peak faster than Luo Fan's spiritual light clone. It's about time. Feeling that his entire body had recovered to its peak, Luo Fan thought to himself. With this thought, he began to contact his main body, wanting to directly move the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light over through space-time. As for the level 3 Emperor who had previously intercepted him and wanted to take away the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he could only wait until the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was completely absorbed into his main body, and then he could search for it again without any worries. At this moment, a figure emitting a familiar light appeared out of thin air outside the Chaos Gate, facing Luo Fan from afar. I didn't expect you to have a fragment of a true sage treasure. It seems like I've underestimated you before, the figure said after appearing. As he spoke, the surrounding space-time suddenly underwent a wonderful change, and an indescribable barrier appeared between Luo Fan and his main body. This barrier didn't block the fundamental connection between his main body and his clone. However, it blocked the space-time connection between his main body and his clone. As a result, if his main body wanted to move his clone over through space-time, it wouldn't be as simple as before, and he would need to break through an extremely tough barrier in order to do so. This, under normal circumstances, it naturally wouldn't have any effect on him. He only needed to use a little bit of strength. By changing the way he moved slightly, he could naturally transcend space-time and directly move anything over. However, at this moment, the situation was different. At this moment, there was a level 3 Emperor who had mastered the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. How could he let Luo Fan do as he pleased? What do you mean? Luo Fan frowned and said calmly. His figure slowly appeared outside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, faintly emitting an inexplicable murderous aura, showing how bad his mood was. Seeing this scene, the figure only showed a cold smile on his face and said, "Any emperor who wants to keep the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light must pass a test before it will be recognized. If you fail the test, you are not qualified to possess the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light." Test? Who is qualified to test me? Luo Fan's heart sank, and he said coldly, "Everyone is qualified." The man said calmly, "As long as you are an emperor who is interested in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, you are qualified. An expert, if you don't even have the courage to accept the challenge, how can you want to possess the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light?" Luo Fan came to a sudden realization, and he sneered, "What test? So it's just a whitewash of your greed, an excuse for you to seize the city of salvation. In essence, there is no difference. But do you think this can be avoided? In the secular world, there's a saying that treasuring a jade ring a crime. If you can't even protect the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, how can you be qualified to possess it?" The level 3 Emperor said calmly. These words had already made the matter clear, causing Luo Fan to feel unhappy in his heart. However, there was nothing much to say. That was the truth. The innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was so precious that it was almost equivalent to making one eternal and indestructible. One could imagine how tempting it was to cultivators. If one didn't display enough strength to make other cultivators wary, who would admit that one was qualified to possess the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, who would think that they couldn't replace you in controlling the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As for the hidden rules and the like, it could only deceive ghosts. Thinking of this, Luo Fan slowly took out the V-shaped fragment of the primordial origin spiritual treasure and said lightly, "After seeing the method I used a few days ago, you still think that I don't have the qualifications and still dare to appear in front of me. It seems that you already have the confidence to deal with this treasure, right? Then show it to me."